Naruto and Hinata sat in plushy seats that they had in their hideout, discussing various methods of hunting down Itachi. They both figured Tsunade would assign a tracking team with the blonde squad, and the Hyuga and her comrades had made quite a name for themselves over the years. You talked to Anko tonight, right? Yeah, she wasn't as violent as the last time we talked. Hell, she didn't even flinch when Shia put her claws against her back. How was the meeting with Eros? And Hinata's face immediately contorted into a scowl when Naruto mentioned Jiraiya. The lousy pervert was spying on women when I found him. He didn't even have the decency to show embarrassment when I spoke with him. The nerve? As Hinata continued with her tirade, with the occasional castration threat, Naruto started rummaging around for something in his bag. When he looked back up, Hinata was done with her rant against Jiraiya and was now curiously looking at him. Imagine having to deal with him for nearly 3 years. Even I was about to rip his head off. Care for a drink? Hinata blinked before reaching out towards the bottle in Naruto's hand. In his other hand was an identical bottle. They were curiously shaped, as the neck of the bottle was shaped like an empty roll of tissue paper and the body squared out. They were filled with a dark amber liquid that sparkled like 1,000 diamonds when the light reflected off of it. She could smell the alcohol coming off the bottle, like a sweet vapor that threatened to overwhelm the senses completely. She knew that this was much stronger than the sake which she drank occasionally. She was guessing that the liquid in front of her had a proof of about 90, much higher than the 35 or so she was used to. When she grabbed the bottle, she took an experimental sip before going into a coughing fit. She glared at Naruto as he raised his and chirped cheers before downing it. Hinata watched for a second before following suit, resisting the urge to cough again. The rum tasted like bitter sugar, but also had a hint of spice in it. It made her want to cough, as if she was eating grated black pepper, but she bore it. When she finished about half of it, she put it down and noticed that the room was swaying. Wait, the room was moving? Hinata shook her head, but it did no good. Oh, the headache she would have when she woke up. And Naruto, she sputtered, her mouth fell numb. What's this stuff? C called. He looked at her for a moment before responding. It's a drink called rum that Jiraiya and I found on our travels. Pretty weak if you ask me. He took another swig of rum before getting up. Care to dance? He asked with a wide Cheshire grin. Hinata tested her footing before slowly getting up, being careful not to bump into anything. Naruto took her hand after she tripped over a little tipsy. Are we? Hinata giggled before replying, oh shut up. Slowly, he led her towards an empty space in the hideout. With a snap of his fingers, a slow, melodious song that just made one want to snuggle up to the person one was dancing with began, and that's exactly what Hinata did, swaying with the music. She wished that the moment would never end. But alas, that was never to come, as she managed to trip over something and force Naruto down onto the couch. While landing on top of him, they stared deeply into each other's eyes before kissing, a slow, passionate kiss. One that left Hinata tingling all over after it was done. Suddenly, Hinata felt very tired. She yawned before snuggling into Naruto and drifting off to sleep. Naruto looked at her for a moment. Goodness, you're beautiful. After a few moments of admiring her, he drifted off to dreamland, idly noticing that most of the rum was still there. As the two slept soundly, Garaza poked her head into the room, curious as to the commotion. Her crimson eye. The next morning, Hinata woke up with a monster of a headache, making her flinch at the slightest of noises. The steady thumping of something soft, warm, and moving under her did not help. Wait a second, moving? She groggily opened her eyes to see a torso of somebody. She looked up at the face of her unofficial boyfriend before snuggling in again and drifting off to slumber. A few hours later, Naruto woke up with the feeling of something soft, squishy, and warm on top of him. Looking down through cracked eyelids, he grinned. He waited a few moments before rousing Hinata from her sleep. With a moan, Hinata came to, before blushing at seeing that Naruto was awake. Morning, beautiful, good rest besides the pounding headache. Yeah. Here, have one of these. Nuren said that they would get rid of the worst of hangovers. Hinata looked at the small, brown pill questioningly before Naruto smiled at her. Nuren may be one of the worst addicts you'll ever meet, but he knows his drugs. Deciding that it was safe, she swallowed it. Seconds later, Hinata immediately felt much better, albeit a little groggy. When she looked back at Naruto, he was looking at something. Hinata moved her eyes over at the spot he was looking at and spotted the two now empty rum bottles. Hinata. Yeah. Why is the rum gone? Why is the rum gone? Oh well, on with the show. The next few days were tense for those in Konoha who were somewhat privy to its secret happenings. Tsunade was under a lot of stress at this point, and without Shizune to help keep her in line by stealing her booze, the constantly incoming mountain of paperwork was backing up. She sat in her chair in midday, bottle in hand, when Jiraiya entered her office. A little early to be drinkin', she eyed him. Shut up. I'm running ragged here, I know what you mean. He leaned against her desk. Anko hear anything from Curse yet? The aged shinobi knew the dual geniuses wished to keep even their contacts a mystery, so he decided to respect that for now. After all, sometimes it doesn't help to know everything. Sometimes. Tsunade nodded and began explaining the Mitarashi's report to her fellow Sannin, unaware that his interest was perfectly feigned. Everything the Snake Mistress revealed: Danzo's defeat, the Sharingan, the Omega project was repetitious to the old man's ears. Curse wants to go after Itachi, but I don't know about that. How? So she took a deep breath. The village is my first and foremost concern, not some criminal who hasn't been around for a few years. I think figuring out what's going on. She sneered, but nodded him. Now that we know Danzo's root headquarters is underground, I think the Anbu tunnels in Sector 6 must run parallel to a tunnel connected to it. Jiraiya added 2 and 2. You think that during the tunnel system's construction, they opened up a hole and found a second system. Precisely. She took another swig of alcohol. I've already put a demolition team on it to find that second system. Wouldn't that take a while? We have no idea exactly where they run parallel. It could be no bigger than a manhole for all we know. She nodded grimly. I know. But I have to try. An awkward silence passed. What if you find it? Then what? Anko and Tamari are on standby with a few infiltration teams. If when we find the second tunnel system, they're going in to find the root's headquarters. This struck the aged ninja as an interesting turn of events. So you've started letting others in on this sort of. She placed the bottle on the overflowing table and turned towards her former squaw mate. The way we picked up Danzo, there's no way I could have buried that. Her mind recalled the frantic search for the traitor following Shizune's capture of the man. If he died or faltered in the slightest, the ensuing explosives attached to him would have surely carved out a crater in the village. Thankfully, they found him in time and safely defused the insane number of deadly tags. But all they know is that the route is out of commission, and they're going to investigate. The Toadmaster found an inconsistency in her plan. Then why the Sand Ninja? This is a local problem, out of her jurisdiction. A lot of shinobi are out on assignment. We need to fill the ranks. Suna's receiving a hefty sum for her continued services. Jiraiya nodded as he took in all of this. What if you don't find anything? He inquired. What if the route really is gone, and there's no evidence of this Omega project anywhere? Where will you go from there? She regarded him with a blank stare. Obviously, she hadn't figured that part out yet. Look, the massive Sannin crossed his arms. Regardless of the danger beneath the village, Akatsuki's a confirmed threat that we'll have to deal with at some point. They've already captured most of the tail beasts, so it's only a matter of time until they come for Naruto. You very well may be chasing a wild goose when the real danger is staring you in the face. While we're busy strolling through few tunnels, the Akatsuki might just roll in, flatten the village, and take Naruto, while you did nothing to prevent it. Do you want that on your conscience? Tsunade sneered at this train of logic. He is right on one thing. I don't know the threat level of whatever Danzo was involved with. It could be less dangerous than the Akatsuki, but it could be a bigger threat just as well. Either way, Konoha is in danger. The white-haired master interrupted her thoughts. A contact of mine suggested that the leader of the Akatsuki is located in the Rain Country. Since you've got a handle on things here, I think I'll go check things out over there. This broke her from her revelry. No. What if things get bad here while you're gone? What if we need your help? Her sudden outburst surprised the Sannin. Is she scared? I knew she was under a lot of stress, but this? He straightened and eyed the elderly woman. I never had you pegged for an indecisive person. What happened? Why are you afraid? She eyed him and choked. She was generally adept at squashing her emotions, but everything that had been happening the past few days was catching up to her. The sudden arrival of a rogue element under Konoha, a nameless assailant that held his own against the Toad Sage and wrecked Shizune's mind, the looming threat of Akatsuki on the horizon, it was a lot for one person to bear. Jiraiya, her voice trembled, I don't know what to do. Between Danzo and Shizune and the advisors and almost losing you, he cracked a sad smile. Hey, cut it out. You're the Hokage, for crying out loud. You're the one whom everyone looks up to, the example for them all. So don't be like this. Jiraiya knew it had to be hard. That was part of the reason he declined the prestigious position. People who knew of him would attribute his choice to laziness and womanizing, but in truth he never really felt that he could live up to the name. I couldn't save my friend, protect my teacher, not even my student. What right would I have to call the shots? Tsunade took several deep breaths with closed eyes to calm down. She lowered her head into her hands to relax further and contemplate the situation in a logical manner. Jiri is right. I don't know the scope of the problems in the village, but Akatsuki is a definite threat. If capturing Itachi curbs any threats, then I need to take that chance. When she was certain her voice wouldn't fail, her head rose, and she regarded her old teammate with reinforced eyes. All right, you go to the rain country and see what you can dig up. I'll send someone after Itachi. While you do that, maybe hitting them on two fronts will weaken them a little. He smirked in response. Will do, Princess Tsunade. With that, he turned and strolled for the door. His hand rose in a wave before he disappeared from view. The blonde Hokage watched after the man for a few seconds longer. Maybe when he gets back, she smiled to herself and wondered who would be best for the task of hunting down the elder Uchiha. Let's see, rumor has it that Orochimaru's dead and that Sasuke's roaming around. I think Naruto would be pumped knowing that there was a way to bring him back. Her mind lightened a little at the blonde in question. She knew he was his own man, but he was still something akin to a family to her. But I doubt one team will be enough. They'll need a tracking team to find Itachi. Now what's the best team on hand? She shuffled through the paper avalanche on her desk for the roster and, upon locating the hefty document, scrolled through it while marking off the teams currently on assignment. Looks like Kurenai's team is the only one available. The tension within the village carried on into the evening, but not to the same extent as Tsunade's worries. Naruto was merely anxious. This was a monstrous mystery to him, and he prayed that Hinata could solve it in time to save the village once again. I just hope this isn't a wild goose chase, he hoped while sitting on his bed in nervous contemplation. Otherwise, we'll be gone. If the village comes under attack. That notion froze the blood in his veins. He hadn't even considered it until now. Wait, what if the enemies in Konoha, Wanmi and Hinata gone? What if they've planned all this out? Planned for us to overthink things and go looking for an answer to a problem that doesn't exist? Or am I just thinking too hard? He clutched his head. This is so frustrating. He attempted to analyze things further but couldn't. He was working on speculation alone at this point. Damn it, he groaned. I better quit before I get a headache. Lying back on his bed and closing his eyes to tune out the world, he caught the barest hints of an odor from his bed sheets. Specifically, he could smell her limited ventures under his covers had died out as of late as she came to terms with her familial status, but that didn't mean she didn't leave behind a signature scent. Where is she? And about to satisfy his curiosity, he descended into his private chamber and poked his head into the parallel room. His brow rose when he found her working on something in nothing but a pair of boxers and that rag she called a shirt. He started apprehensively. What are you working on? Her head shot up and her wide-angled eyes instantly receded, evidence that it was actually Aya that had been working. See, curse, the girl yelped. I didn't hear you come in. Yeah, he brought the rest of his body into the cluttered room. What's all this? This? She scratched the back of her head while glancing back and forth between the scattered scrolls and loose papers. She was obviously trying to hide something. It's, research? He bent over one of the shreds of paper and analyzed the ink seal work on it. On what? I don't think I've seen this before. Her arms flailed wildly as she pranced about the maze of ink and paper. Don't touch it. It's really delicate. She finally reached him and slammed into him with all her uneasy momentum. All right, he consented, backing away under her gentle push. She shoved him out of the room and followed after him with a small pout. He chuckled at the cute look on her face and mussed her messy brown hair. So what are you working on? It's a seal. Really? This was good. She was taking the initiative. Want any help? I'd kinda like to see you too. She mulled the offer over in her head for all of 2 milliseconds and declined gracefully. Nope. I've got it all under control. You sure? Yep, she smiled. He returned the friendly gesture before letting. When he disappeared from view, she sighed and returned to her seal-laden room. At least he liked this. Don't get your hopes up, Aya spoke up. Remember, we're no more than siblings to him. That's not gonna change no matter what we do. I know. She plopped down and painted a few more strokes in the central mark to complete it. But I want to be useful. Don't we both? Now, looks like we've figured out the main seal. Yes, I think that's right. I'm pretty sure it's compatible with Curse's seal. The second personality laughed. Guess all those nights of sleeping with him paid off, Aya. But we ain't done yet. She ignored the primary self's bright blush, grabbed the claws. We gotta put the support seals in them. Sakura couldn't sleep, her mind fluttered with far too many thoughts and emotions for her to properly rest. Tsunade had summoned her and Naruto earlier that day, and informed them of the hunt for Itachi and, ultimately, Sasuke. I'm glad we're going after Sasuke, she thought, but what'll I do when he returns? What will I say when we find him? In an attempt to strike these old worries from her head, she rolled over. It failed miserably. Thinking of Sasuke these days invoked happy memories of times past, but not fond notions for the future. Even if Sasuke came back to us, would he still be himself? Would he ever see me the way I see him? For that matter, do I even see him that way anymore? She frowned, unsure of what she felt towards the rogue Uchiha. She tried to remember those old feelings of affection whenever she thought of the wayward ninja, but now his image no longer popped into her mind. Rather, it was Naruto. Have my feelings changed? She honestly wondered, could it be that I see Naruto like I did Sasuke? A tear rolled down her cheek and her throat choked. Damn it, she whispered to the night sky, I don't understand it. Hinata was busy tying up as many loose ends as she could in her private lab. Naruto had graciously loaned her a storage scroll for her gear, and she was examining her rebuilt equipment before storing them in the marked paper. When she got to yin and yang, she slowed for a moment. I never did figure out how that crystal works, she mused. I don't even know what its original purpose is, I just started using it. Licking her lips, she contemplated unearthing the device and doing a little research on it before thinking better of it. We're capturing an Uchiha. Two of them if things go well. I'd better not look a gift horse in the mouth until I know I won't need it. Once everything was properly stored away, she stuffed the scroll in her standard issue pouch and took a long visual pull of her concealed abode. An odd sense of nostalgia that was both quaint and unnerving tugged at her, and she started towards Garaza's cramped workstation to distract herself from it. Hey Garaza, the Hyuga greeted before sticking her head into the small room. How are you? Said Nash and turned her head to the younger benefactor with a satisfied smile, Nurin sitting next to her on the floor with a matching grin and faraway eyes. Hey, silence. What's up? The blue-haired genius creased an eyebrow at the comfy scene. I've got a mission tomorrow, probably a long one. Heard anything unusual lately? Her smile transformed into a smug grimace. Nope, just a few explosions. A few what explosions? The crimson-eyed blood user saluted. Yes, ma'am. As the intelligent Hyuga exited the confined space, she heard the squatter's voice trail after her. Have fun in paradise. Silence. She simply shook her head at the boisterous druggie and approached her other charges, Shiori and Ichiru. Hey, you two. Mistress, they both greeted simultaneously before Shiori picked up the slack. Are you setting off yet? She smiled humbly, then clapped her hands together. Sorry guys, I can't install your upgrades until I get back. Really sorry. They smiled nonetheless. Their mistress was pressed for time. It was understandable. Not a problem, mistress, the male Hyuga consoled with his trademark twitch. We can wait for a while. Silence knew this was true, sort of. The reason she had been putting off the reanimated duo's upgrades was because when she was finished, they would finally be more machine than human. They're necessary repairs. She knew if I don't do it, they'll die. But still, it's better to hang on to your humanity, isn't it? She wished she could answer that moral issue, but she honestly couldn't. Right. I'll do it, as soon as I get back, though. Promised. The mechanized duo continued their unusual smirks. We wish you luck, mistress. She smiled one last time, before turning to leave. See you guys in a bit. The next morning, the sun was hidden behind a sheet of darkened clouds. The sky wept as the rains blanketed the earth in cold moisture in a summer shower, the ground slick with mud and wet grass. The blonde genius's eyes cracked open to peer at the cloudy sky. One of those days, huh? He couldn't really describe it, but he felt the crying skyline was some kind of foreboding force, a sign of things to come. Naruto wasn't a suspicious person, not by a long shot, but with the situation deteriorating as it was, he couldn't help but notice that nagging feeling. He prepared to turn over when he almost rolled onto a familiar figure. Shia, once again, was in his bed. This time, however, she wasn't smothering him. Rather, she took up the very edge and gave him his space. Well, he figured, small steps, I guess. He gently shook her shoulder. Shia, he spoke lowly, it's morning. She groaned. 5 more minutes, bro. This struck him as odd. This was the first time she had ever referred to him as something other than his alternate name. She looks really comfortable. Come to think of it, she might have shared a bed with her real brother. When she was still with the sound, he decided to give it another go and poked her in the nose. Shia, he spoke a little louder in her ear. Wake up. Her eyes gradually fluttered up, and she blinked before yawning in the blonde's face. morning, it didn't seem to occur to her that she shared the same covers as her adoptive sibling. Is there time for breakfast? The Uzumaki nodded and swung his legs off of the bed. I've got an hour before I have to be at the gates. She stretched and almost gave the blonde an eyeful thanks to her flimsy sleepwear. You have a mission today, yeah? He knew what was coming next. I don't know how long it'll take, though. Hinata and I are going after a missing ninja that used to be from here. Shia smiled and giggled. Sounds like fun. I'll tag along. The young genius opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. When had he ever actually won an argument against the preteen? Besides that, what can I do to stop her? She'll just follow us anyway. Said girl sleepily made her way to the kitchen and began pouring water into a pan for boiling with all the speed allocated a turtle. It was apparent that she was up late. Naruto had missed her completely the previous evening and she was paying for it. But she was a ninja, so she took it with no complaints. The blonde genius dressed himself, stepped into the kitchen, and eyed her curiously. She looks more mature, he mused, attributing the change to her gradual acceptance of her familial position. It's a sad way to grow up, he thought, knowing that it was due to misfortune in life, rather than experiencing good times. The male prodigy packed all his gear, being sure that his alternate outfit was properly sealed in one of several scrolls. Once he was satisfied, he stood to his feet and glanced at Chia, before twitching for the door. He did a double take as the auburn-eyed girl approached in most of her gear. Her mask was still in her clawed hands. Naruto felt that something was off, but he smiled at her. Hey, he ruffled her unruly hair. I'm proud of you. You know that. She smiled at the affection. Thanks, she chirped. He opened the door and pulled her to his side with an arm hooked around her neck. You know, he started as they walked through the door, when we get back, I'll introduce you to someone I know. I think you'll like him. He shut the door and locked it. He's about your age. Name's Konoha. Naruto stood before the gates, frustrated at the downpour. It reminded him of Hinata's concealed techniques, and it took every ounce of willpower not to interact with the now shy Hyuga like he wanted to. Oh well, he analyzed, can win 'em all. As the dual squads began moving through the foul weather, a small grin found its way to his lips. He could feel Shia's presence moving behind them. Well, Kiba and Akamaru haven't noticed her yet, and I don't think Shino has either. They'd have said something by now. A familiar presence came up beside him, and he averted his eyes. Hey, Sakura. Hi, Naruto, she greeted in return, keeping her voice low. She couldn't shake the feeling that the blonde meant something more to her these days, and she wanted to confirm it. So, who do you think we'll find first? The Uzumaki almost sneered. He could see small talk from a mile away, and from this damn girl of all people. If there's ever been a time to be a bumbling moron, now would be it. He gazed ahead and said seriously, we'll definitely find Sasuke and bring him back. That's a promise of a lifetime. Of course, he thought differently. Damn it, why did I have to get caught up in that moment so long ago? I don't want to find him, I want to kill him. She smiled ever so slightly. Hey, Naruto, you don't have to do this alone. I'll help you bring Sasuke back. I don't want to be a burden to everyone anymore. I don't have to be a burden to you, you're not. Naruto groaned inwardly. Oh Lord, what did I do to deserve this? Wait, don't answer that. He simply stared at her for a moment longer before she broke off, resisting the urge to punch her in the face every millisecond she hung around him. To him, she was nothing more than a medic, and even then she couldn't compare to Hinata. But Sakura left with a warm feeling in her chest. She felt that she knew herself a little better now, but a tiny part of her was still loyal to Sasuke. It wouldn't be won over so easily. But, I'm sure if I try, I can be true to myself. The Haruno was too busy with self-reflection to notice the glare jabbing into her from behind. Hinata knew what the pink-haired girl was trying to do. She smirked internally at the futility of it all, but it didn't make her any less jealous. You'll never win him over, she mentally taunted the fellow shinobi. If you really loved him, you know more about him like I do. Instead of trying to get his attention, she cut off the inward rant before it could continue. She needed her full attention available for any achas in the area. The demolition teams were having one hell of a time locating the parallel hallway that led to the second tunnel system, and their lack of haste wore thin on Anko's nerves. She glanced at Tamari sitting beside her, and wondered if the foreign ninja felt the same. Ready for this, kid? The Sand Shinobi eyed her warily and shrugged, irritated that the snake charmer saw fit to give her such a childish nickname. Who knows, you said there was a tunnel system under Suna, right? Receiving a simple nod in reply, she continued. Shouldn't that give you a clue? Once again, the blonde teen shrugged. I got the feeling that Suna's hidden tunnels hadn't been used for a long time. That obviously isn't the case here since we are going in to investigate Danzo's group. The Mitarashi stuck her lip out in consideration. Good point. Truth be told, there wasn't much to talk about. They had already exchanged everything they believed worth saying in wake of the demolition team's snail pace. Well, almost everything. You said some girl named Silence helped you out in Suna. Tell me about her. Tamari knew the older woman was simply trying to pass the time, and after another few hours, one of the demolition teams broke through the wall to be met with a blast of stale air. When the leading women were informed of this, they strode to the cramped worksite within the Anbu complex and nodded satisfactorily. All right, boys, Anko addressed the gathered ninjas, widen that hole a little more. Izumo, Katetsu, you're with me and Tamari. The rest of you fall in line. We're going in on a threat assessment. Deidara and Toby walked along the former's choice of path. The bomb user was out for blood. Only the Uzumaki Uchiha would satisfy his thirst for vengeance. Toby, in keeping with his idiotic visage, was content to let the deadly artist stew, so he followed along with the man's plans with a hearty attitude. The oldest Uchiha was willing to let either of his interests be beaten around a bit by the irate sculptor. In the end, it would amount to little. His plans would continue forward and, one day, end with the destruction of Konoha. Revenge shall be mine, Madara swore to himself, and it will be sweet. I'm telling Va. Toby, Deidara spat. I'm gonna kill the first one I come across. I don't even care what the leader says, I'm killing him. He was on a serious tirade at the moment. Yes, the mask of Toby assured his compulsive partner. It'll be great. Tell you what, he got an idea. I got a great way of finding them. The effeminate bomb user led his masked comrade to a nearby clearing, molded some clay in his extra mouths, and summoned a massive artificial winged beast. Aerial reconnaissance. They'll never see it coming. He bent his knees to leap onto the clay familiar when the faint sound of applause echoed in the air and caught his ears. Frowning, he turned in place to find the witnesses. TWO figures appeared from their unintentional destination on the dirt road, one of them casually clapping with a simple smile adorning his face. He looked like a well-groomed civilian with his plain features and lanky hair. The only thing distinct about him was the tightly bound leather jacket around his slim torso. The other character was something else entirely. He was a giant of a man, easily topping 8 feet. He wore nothing but a pair of knee-high boots over a ragged pair of woolen pants, and his muscle body was drenched in old scars. His hair was a crimson mane that flowed down his back, and his eyes looked like orbs of hot blood. His appearance, coupled with his apathetic snarl, spoke volumes to this man's battle experience in the eyes of a shinobi. Very impressive, the clapping man announced with a thick accent neither Akatsuki member could place. Truly a work of art. I can see that how value the importance of the moment razors and the everlasting monument. Who the hell are you? Deidara inquired angrily. He felt that, despite the praise, this smiling man was mocking his artistic work. That is not important. What is important is that our charge is protected. How you see fit to destroy him for the sake of fighting. Unfighting is not a good thing. He screwed his face up. This foreigner was royally pissing him off. Fine, then. If I gotta fight you two to get my revenge, so be it. He hopped on his clay bird and the thing's wings slapped at the ground and launched skyward. The leather-clad man stared at the sky in mock wonder. That is high. He turned to his partner. Gaza, why don't Hayu handles this one? Hayu know how I am during a fight. The scar giant glared at him with silent eyes before stepping forward and engaging the airborne artist in battle. He would do his job, as would his co-workers. Madara took this opportunity to approach the lone foreigner. He knew that these men were different. Were they related to his associate? You there? He addressed the man and attracted his attention. Are you from Konoha? He understood that only a select few should know this. Hayu must be a client. Yes, he nodded. Do you bring news of Naruto Uzumaki? The harmless man smiled wide. This masked criminal certainly chose his words carefully. Yeah, and his delivery is being orchestrated by an associate of ours. Team 7 and 8 traveled for some time until reaching the outskirts of a moderately sized town. Kakashi had planned on everyone splitting up to increase their chances of locating the Rokuchihas sooner or later, and this was looking like the place to do it. He leapt to a nearby rooftop and halted, silently signaling everyone to do the same. When they did, Sakura frowned at this idea. She wasn't comfortable with the notion of being separated from everyone, Naruto in particular, and possibly coming into contact with a dangerous criminal. It sent a chill up her spine. But when she opened her mouth to voice her concern, she realized that said chill hadn't dissipated. Why is it cold? She glanced around and noticed that no one else seemed to be too bothered by it, so she shrugged it off. All right, the haddock concluded, I'll pair you guys off with my hounds. He readied his palm for the summoning technique, but stopped before he could touch the roof. Was that mist? What the? Kiba rolled his shoulders underneath his parka. Is it just me, or is it getting cold out here? Naruto took an experimental huff and actually saw his breath. It is his moronic mask dropped for the moment, but the situation distracted everyone from noticing the subtle change. Hinata noted the blonde's change though, and she snapped her bloodline into use. The moment she did, she saw the clouds darkening as the weather changed. Is that? She began rubbing her arms for warmth. Snow? That's impossible, Yamato muttered as he stared at the shifting sky. It's the middle of summer. Kakashi knew that whatever technique this was, it couldn't be good. Everyone, move. The group instantly obeyed and scattered. Naruto and Hinata purposely stuck together, but they didn't get far before a cloud of freezing mist enveloped them and hardened into a wall of ice. The Hyuga's Byakugan saw the incredible density of the frozen liquid, and no matter how hard they tried to run from the growing cage, it kept cutting them off. Soon enough, they found themselves seeking out their fellow ninjas in order to gather strength in numbers. Unbeknownst to everyone, their unseen opponents seemed to have this aim in mind. The Konoha shinobi wound up bumping into each other, unable to escape the indestructible walls of ice that enclosed them in the crew dome. Sakura was beginning to panic. It was getting colder, and her extremities were already feeling numbed. What's going on? The medic girl pleaded. Who's attacking us? The Haddock's transplanted eye blazed, and he stared at the freezing environment, but he couldn't detect any discernible technique. That means this is a natural phenomena, or he shuddered at the thought as well as the cold. A bloodline. The group began cautiously moving as one, jumping at every column of ice that formed and blocked their path. Yamato attempted to break apart the impossibly hard ice with his wood techniques, to no avail. He was simply outmatched in terms of strength. Naruto glanced at his blue-haired counterpart in warning. Both were shivering in the dropping temperature and knew that if it kept up, they would have no choice but to expose their real selves in order to escape. The blonde reached out and squeezed the Hyuga's cold hand in reassurance. Unmouth, get ready. When the ground began to rumble. Shit. Kiba swore. Scatter walls and pillars of ice sprung from the wet ground and began forming intricate structures of ornate beauty. It spread and crystallized without interruption into a grand roof, and boulders of frozen liquid formed detailed murals that were frosty to the touch. Trees of fluid diamond stretched across the crystal roof, reminding the Uzumaki of a structure he once saw on his trip with Jiraiya, something referred to as a cathedral. If one could ignore the freezing air, it was a beautiful and tranquil sight to behold. Now that the teams were in disarray, a haunting voice captured their attention. Everyone's heads shot towards the figure and saw him, whether in person or in the ice's reflection. He was a towering old man with frostbitten flesh who wore nothing but the threadbare remnants of a priest's cloak. His bare feet made a sickly sound as he trudged through the frozen environment, and his face appeared as morose and sullen as the dead of winter. Who are you? Kiba shouted, being the hothead of the bunch. The individual stared at the abyss with sad eyes. It is so cold, he stated like a conquered man. There is nothing but an eternal winter in my soul. Kiba verbally railed against the aged assailant, while the others either huddled together for warmth or made attempts to break the ice. Neither worked, and Kakashi knew that this man was in control of a bloodline far surpassing his own. Who are you with? He chattered. What is your goal? The worn-down priest spared him a sorrowful glance. My soul wishes to atone for my sins. He ended his airy reply by gazing at the crystalline ceiling and invoking further frost. There will be no more death by my hands. Hinata's active bloodline could easily. He didn't say anything. Rather, his arms enveloped her and rubbed vigorously. He was freezing, and she was the only source of warmth in this frozen closet. It'll be okay, he tried to reassure her, but he couldn't think of any technique that would destroy the ice without harming her in the process. What do I do? I don't want to die here. Not yet. He closed his azure eyes and planted his face on top of the captive girl's head, reveling in the fact that if he was going to freeze to death, at least he'd die with her. But that was not to be. Suddenly, both prodigies fell through a sudden hole that opened in the wall. Stumbling through, their alert eyes darted toward the life-giving exit, only to find it reform in an instant. What happened? Hinata inquired in mild shock over being alive. Uzumaki quickly scanned the horizon. They were back outside. The unnatural winter still hung in the sky and snow still fell to the cold earth, but they were no longer trapped. He let us go. No sooner had the blonde muttered those words than an outcropping of ice jutted out from the frozen structure and attempted to encase the Hyuga. Naruto yanked Segirl out of the way with milliseconds to spare, but the solidified liquid continued to follow her like a dog chasing a cat. The two began putting distance between them and the bloodline prison, the ice giving pursuit for quite a while. It finally ceased forming when they reached the outskirts of the technique about 2 miles away. Both leaned against trees to catch their breath. Between being frozen alive and the sudden bout of running, they needed a breather. Hinata wheezed. Have to go back for the others? No. The blonde genius shook his head. The ice went after you. If we went back, it'd just go for you again. Curse. Silence. A familiar feminine voice sounded off from nearby to announce Shia's arrival. The moment she landed before them, her clawed fingers whipped off her mask, and she glanced between the two with worry etched on her face. What happened? I don't know. The blonde was no longer gasping for air. We got attacked by an ice user. As he stood and looked back at the frozen prison in which his teammates were trapped, he became breathless again. The Hyuga noted his silence and glanced at the structure, instantly understanding why it rendered him speechless. It was indeed a cathedral of ice. Crystal obelisks spiraled into the heavens, and waves of columns snaked over the tree line. Hills of smooth ice lined the radius of the grandiose technique, and gardens of icy trees clambered overhead. The sunlight was drowned out by the dreary sky, casting the crystal palace into the demure appearance of simple beauty. Aren't the others in there? Shia brought the two back to reality. Hinata glanced at Naruto with wide eyes. We have to help them. They'll die in there, I know. He nodded warily, wondering how to go about destroying the frozen grounds. This was disturbingly reminiscent of his aged battle with the effeminate Haku, and he recalled being able to destroy the ice mirrors upon invoking the fox's power. But that was a cramped dome of mirrors. This was intricate frozen architecture, protected by a 2-mile radius of icy buildings. This is way above what Haku could do. He dredged the depths of his imagination for a solution before deciding to wing it. After all, that was his signature method. With this in mind, he approached the nearest wall of pristine crystal, formed a standard Rasengan, and then slammed the chaotic orb into the natural glass. He maintained the destructive technique for several seconds before releasing it and analyzed the damage. Nothing, he muttered under his breath. That did absolutely nothing. That wasn't quite true. It made a hairline crack on the microscopic level. At this point, the Hyuga had unsealed her gear and went to work with Shia's help adorning the armor. I've got a feeling things'll get hairy from now on. Naruto cracked his knuckles and glanced back to ensure the female ninjas were far enough away. Good, just enough room. He placed his palms together and began channeling chakra through his body. Muscle memory kicked in as the familiar technique clicked in his veins, and the chakra surging through his system began rotating. Seconds passed, and the rotation increased with mounting velocity. 10 seconds later, the Uzumaki slammed his hands into the wall and flew back, unceremoniously slamming into a pine tree. Damn it, the wall was cracked here and there, but otherwise the initial strike of his 9 tornadoes had backfired. Okay, I'll try it from here. He hopped to his feet and repeated the process, this time aiming his arms into the air. The wind instantly spun into a massive whirlwind and, with careful precision, angled into the icy forest with ill intent. The spiraling air tore through the pillars and trees of cold crystal, breaking them apart as it grew in intensity. It's working, but then mounds of frost formed around the ice and solidified with unnatural speed. His tornado began unsuccessful attempts to obliterate smooth boulders of slick glass with its spinning winds, and the blonde released the technique with a sneer. Damn it. He counteracted it so fast. What should we do? The blonde licked his lips and thought. Before he could answer, though, a ghostly figure of their attacker shimmered in the glassy wall. You again? The aged stranger regarded the trio with tired eyes. Your friends shall befall no lasting harm. There shall be no further death by my hands. They'll freeze to death in there, the Hyuga argued, earning her a lifeless gaze. They shall be safe. You have my word. What good is that? The blonde spat, his glare promising death to the elderly assailant. The man's response was merely to lower his head in humility. I have committed many sins, killed the innocent, abandoned my own daughter and grandson. And so I shall spend the remainder of my days atoning for my past indiscretions. I don't care about any of that. Release them. He closed his eyes. By delivering you unto your enemy, many shall be spared. It is a sad fate, but I chose the path that leads to the content of others. Naruto sneered at the man's ambiguous responses, but Hinata could hear the insinuation. Our enemy? Which enemy? The frozen priest glanced at her. You shall find your answer in the Rain Village. Go now, for there is much to be done, and with that, the mysterious ice user vanished from the glassy wall. A moment of silence ushered on the three before being broken by the blonde slamming a fist into the solidified water. Damn it. What the hell? Curse, the Auburn preteen began, bothered by the teen's outburst. Hinata sighed hard and cradled her masked head in her hand. Naruto, I hate to say this, but I think we should go. He instantly eyed her. Hinata, I might hate half the people in there, but that doesn't mean we can leave them here to die. You hit the ice with your most powerful technique, right? Taking his grimace as a yes, she continued. I know my affinities are no match for this, so there's nothing I can do. So you think we should just abandon them and go looking for enemies? I think the enemy was serious when he said they would be safe, and you're willing to take an enemy's word for it? That's not it. Shia's head felt like it was on a swivel going back and forth between the arguing couple. When the dispute escalated, she flung herself at the blonde to snap him out of his frustration. Curse, she pleaded, please stop fighting. He glanced down at her and noted the concern in her muddy eyes. Knowing that her plea was genuine, he scratched her head and sighed. Fine, he shut his brilliant eyes in defeat. We'll head off to the Rain Village, but we've got to do something about this. The blue-haired genius snapped her fingers and replied, send a messenger frog to Konoha. We've only been traveling for half a day. It should get there in a few hours. The blonde shuddered at the amount of time that would take, but what other options were there? He sighed in resignation before biting his thumb and performing the summoning technique. A puff of smoke later, there was an arm-sized toad at his feet. Yo boss, the creature saluted him and attempted to ignore the smallest human's wide stare and open mouth. Hey. He scratched out their current coordinates on a slip of paper and ended it with the message of send help before trying it to the frog. Get this to Konoha. I wanted there 5 seconds ago. Yeesh, you're a real slave driver, boss. But the summon argued no further before Win stopped staring after it. She had never seen a summon before. It talked. Aya was equally amazed. It fucking talked, but if that had the young girl going, what Naruto did next would throw her for a loop. He summoned another toad, a familiar one this time. When the smoke cleared, a house-sized frog sat contentedly before the group. It looked down with curious eyes before croaking, curse, long time no see. He grinned. Hey Gamaka. How's it going? The boisterous summon bellowed. It goes well. What do I need? We need a lift to the Rain Village. We're pressed for time. You up for it? It patted its armored belly. Am I ever? It's been a while since I've come out. A nice hop would do me good. Great. With that, he hopped onto the giant toad's back. Hinata moved to join him and noticed a frozen Shia. Come on, she waved at the girl. It's okay, it won't bite. The girl simply stared after the dual geniuses as they mounted the frog. Seconds passed and she didn't move. It took Kamaka glancing at her and addressing her to snap her out of it. You joining us, or is it just these two? Yeah. She leapt onto the beast's back and positioned herself between the seated curse in silence. When the oversized frog took its first leap, she swallowed her heart. After a few more consecutive jumps, she felt herself adjusting to the speed, but not the situation. Curse shook his head at this. Then where was his cloak? And his ring? She attempted to break into the conversation. When you went on that mission to capture an Akatsuki spy, he wasn't wearing any of those either. He clenched his teeth. His adoptive sister was right. Kabuto, while pretending to pose as an informative to the late Sasori, maintained a low profile by simply being himself. And there was also the matter of the underlings disguised as Itachi and Kisame serving as decoys during the rescue operation for Gaara. Freakin' hell, he planted his masked forehead in his palm. There's no end to this. Hinata reached out and rubbed the blonde's shoulder with an understanding softness. It'll be fine. Let's just take things one at a time. She felt a pair of auburn eyes glaring at her, but didn't turn in time to find Shia's perturbed gaze. The air was still tense between the two girls who, at one point, had been competing for the Uzumaki. She knew this awkwardness would pass one day, but today wasn't it. Naruto felt the Hyuga's affection and attempted to swing the conversation back to the task at hand. All right, do we know anything about the Rain Village? Silence grimaced behind her iron visage. Not much, I'm afraid. The best recon is in radio signals, but reception's really poor from Konoha. I've never really picked up anything worthwhile. Eve her. What is it? Any information's better than nothing. Her hidden brow furrowed in thought. I think there's civil wars over. The boy's eyes almost broke the mirrors over them. You're kidding? That's huge. Who won? Hinata shrugged. I don't know. All I could hear clearly were congratulations and praises. I never heard anything about a sign. Naruto was about to pry further when, out of nowhere, Shia's voice spoke in his place. They're fundamentalists. Both prodigies stared at the young girl with raised brows. She eyed them innocently. If they are singing songs of praise, they're probably the fundamentalists. For a moment, neither genius dared utter a word. Naruto broke the verbal stalemate. How do you know that? The disturbed girl's head cocked. That's where I'm from. At this point, both teenagers gawked at her. This time, Hinata spoke for everyone. You're from the Rain Village? How? When? Why didn't you ever tell us? Lion imitating her replacement sibling. I didn't think it was important, Shia Sir Shia. Naruto grasped the girl's shoulders and stared directly at her hidden eyes. It's extremely important. Tell us everything you know. Well, her mindless hand rose and thumbed her chin. I was very little when my brother and I left. I think I was only 3. I don't really remember anything, though. I know it rained a lot. This earned a dull look from the opposing prodigies, but hindered her in no way. And I remember one time hearing someone saying God is on our side over and over. She giggled at the distant memory. My brother used to say they were crazier than we were. The blonde released the girl and stared in contemplation at his partner. Hinata gazed back, both thought along similar lines. We were up against fundamentalists. Naruto asked a rhetorical question. That's not good. Amen. She smiled but realized the joke was terrible. Religious armies usually fight until there's no one left standing. He nodded in affirmation. His brief stints with Jashin's devout were proof of concept. But those were only 2 killers. How would they face a whole village? We're gonna have to do some serious recon before making a move. Shia, he turned back to the younger girl, if you were in the village, would you remember places? She sucked in air through her mouthpiece in preparation for a dubious answer. I'm not sure. I barely remember the village at all, and it's been a long time. Hinata drank in all this depressing information, and the gears whirred in her swift mind. We should find Jiraiya once we get there. Naruto nodded in confirmation. A form and cell with ninjas of their caliber would be insurmountable to any ordinary force. Akatsuki's leader would truly have to be a god in order to defeat them without dying in the process. Thoughts of victory with the people who meant the most to him burned a smile onto his lips. All right, that's the plan. Out of nowhere the trio of heads swiveled to the east. Something was upon them. Even Gamaka felt it and reacted. Holy crap, the giant toad exclaimed. Where did he come from? No sooner had the summon shouted than a massive snake bore down on the oversized amphibian. The giant reptile's fangs missed the leaping frog's body, but they did rip open one of its hind legs. Gamaka. Naruto shouted as the familiar skidded to a halt and painted a bloody path. You okay? The oversized toad grunted in pain. I'll live, he croaked, but I'm not going anywhere for a while. The blonde panicked for a split second before that tiny voice in the back of his head told him to calm down. Time stood still, and his hidden eyes glanced at the scrambling girls behind him before moving in the direction of the Rain Village. We're only a few hours away, if we really haul, he analyzed, and there's only one ninja left that we know of who can summon snakes. An impromptu plan formed in his mind and slipped a grin onto his exposed mouth. Gamaka, yeah. The toad was irritated at his gaping wound. Who wouldn't be? Frog oil, now? I'll let you go after. The frog glanced at the summoner atop his head and built up the necessary bile in his throat. Here, he shouted before belching a horizontal waterfall of flammable liquid. Hinata knew what her counterpart was up to and nabbed Shia by the sleeve. Come on, she stated with intense calm, we've got to get off. But the poor girl's head swiveled between the 2 prodigies. Curse, he'll be fine. She felt the summon's body rise. We've got to go. With that, she flung an arm around the preteen's waist and leapt to the ground. An instant later, both Kunoichis felt the searing heat. Gamaka's spray of oil coated the landscape before him, snake and all. The instant the final drop left his moist lips, Curse spat a weak fireball into the liquid maelstrom, and the slick fluid lit up. I wish you well, Curse, the toad, condoled before bursting from the mortal plane in a plume of smoke. Uzumaki dropped to the ground, and his armored Jetta sandals left divots in the hard dirt. He straightened and unsealed his custom ninjato without peeling his eyes from the incredible blaze before him. The silhouette of the reptilian summon writhed in the flames and succumbed to gravity with a great crash, creating an eruption of gaseous plasma with its breeze. It's beautiful. For the smallest of moments, the blonde prodigy lost himself in the dancing flames as they licked the sky in graceful lethality. Hyuga snapped her bloodline on and found 4 approaching assailants. They've got to take the long way around because of the fire, but they're fast. Her pale eyes narrowed and widened in pleasure upon noting that one of the sudden attackers possessed an aura she hadn't seen in years. Sasuke Uchiha, she mumbled, starting for Naruto, before noticing that Shia hung back. Her all-seeing eyes knew the younger girl was planning to melt into the environment and wait for an opportune moment to strike, but she wouldn't have known without the use of her advanced eyesight. Clever, Shia, clever. Hey, Hinata, Naruto spoke in little more than a whisper when said girl approached. You see him? Yeah, she nodded. He's with 3 others moving around to flank us. 2 of his party is going right, and he's coming with another on the left. The blonde nodded in mute understanding, stuck his seal-encrusted blade into the earth, and produced 2 handfuls of shuriken. The throwing stars were odd, grooves fitted for innumerable seals were carved into the slats that took the place of the standard central holes. His hidden eyes darted to the left and he froze like a statue. You take the guys on the right, I've got a score to settle with Sasuke. She eyed him with mild confusion as well as annoyance. Are you stupid? He's seen you in action before. It's better if we gang up on him. Sasuke wouldn't travel with pushovers, he explained with an icy tone. Go get him, he encouraged Hinata as she darted off to strike the oncoming enemies. When she was out of earshot he added, be safe. Hinata the blonde prodigy closed his concealed cerulean eyes and became a statue of flesh and bone. He might have been a genius, but he was still vulnerable to the Sharingan's mind tricks should he gaze upon it. Not a muscle moved as he listened for the familiar sound of footsteps amidst the crackling of the grandiose flames. He finally heard a tuft of grass flatten under a heel no more than 10 feet away, and he sprung into action. Channeling chakra into his custom shuriken, he formed seals of wine through the miniature trenchwork of grooves, and promptly lobbed the air-sharpened weapons point-blank into the assailant. In all of this, he didn't take the millisecond required to register the appearance of his attacker. All the shuriken flew straight through their target, but said enemy was a boy who exploded into water and dropped an oversized blade. That's Zabuza's sword, Naruto realized, reaching for his own ninjato while pouring chakra into the weapon. A configuration of seals lit up on the blade and flashed as the teen jerked the sword from the ground, bringing a flexible pillar of stone with it. Said column of hardened earth smashed into the remnants of the liquid attacker and blew him into droplets. The Uzumaki frowned upon the realization that the scattered spray began moving back into place to reform, but the blonde knew this ninja was a mere distraction. He felt a sudden presence appear from behind and, without enough time to turn, broke his ninjato free from the impromptu pillar and swung it behind his back. It couldn't have been closer. Sasuke's familiar blade clashed with the custom sword in an instant, creating a tiny spark as the opposing metals met. The Uchiha now knew that the advantage of surprise was gone, so he thrust his free arm forward and clamped a fist of crackling energy. The chakra in his palm formed a temporary blade and shot forward into the blonde enigma, only for Naruto to spin on his axis and receive little more than a scratch as he turned with the flow of the manipulated blade. Ninjato still occupied against the snake user's blade, Curse put his thumb to his index and middle fingers on his free hand and lashed out at the younger Uchiha. A short blade of wind cut straight through the energy sword and grazed Sasuke's cheek as the aforementioned teen jerked his head to the side to avoid decapitation. The Uzumakis followed up his non-corporeal attack by gathering chakra in his chest. A single glance at the rogue ninja's face told the Konoha genius that Sasuke knew what was about to happen, and the Uchiha broke off from the point-blank stalemate. The blonde's cheeks bulged behind his crimson mask, and he belched fire at the repositioned traitor, accenting the attack by slashing another blade of wind into the flames to create an airborne sword of fire. But as predicted, the Sharingan noticed this and Sasuke leapt high into the sky out of harm's way, well before he was in any danger. Said Avenger, prepared to hurl an armful of poisonous snakes at his counterpart, when he saw his opponent throw his arms to the side. 2 giant shuriken appeared out of nowhere, although the Uchiha's bloodline saw the colorful chakra dissipating from the seals on the blonde's arm bracelets. Seals, eh? 2 can play at that game. In a wink, he sheathed his slim blade, pulled apart the wraps from his wrists, and unsealed a hail of his own throwing stars from the tattooed seals. Before Naruto could even grip his larger-than-life shuriken, Sasuke had the air filled with spinning metal. This was not lost on the masked prodigy. He responded by reaching to one of the large tattoos on his back, releasing an oversized fan reminiscent of a certain foreign kunoichi, and launching a contained hurricane into the storm of steel. The instant the technique left the fan, he dropped it, grasped the man-sized shuriken at his sides, and lobbed the enormous weapons into the fray before taking another swing with the fan. The second breeze spurned the huge throwing stars into faster trajectories, and the fan was sealed and replaced by the ninjato before the blonde could blink twice. Uchiha sneered. He knew going airborne was a mistake the moment Naruto pulled out a battle fan. Utilizing his curse seal, he formed a single grotesque wing to shield himself from the onslaught of rerouted shuriken and deadly winds. The second he felt the impacts recede, he removed the fleshy appendage from his vision, caught the 2 giant shuriken flying his way through their central holes, and turned them on their sides to block the second assault of wind. When the deadly storm passed, Sasuke peered at the oncoming ground to find no Uzumaki in sight. He received his answer in the form of 4 clones jumping him the moment he touched down. With a flick of his sword, he dispatched one of them only to have the blade slowed when the copy deteriorated into sludge. Frustration mounting, he channeled an unnecessary amount of crackling chakra into his personal weapon and, for all practical purposes, blasted it out of the column of muck and passed it through the other 3 like a hot knife through butter. When the threat was neutralized, he braced for another attack and found none. His Sharingan saw no nearby signatures belonging to his former rival, and he wondered what was up. Seeing his chance, he melted into the foliage untainted by the raging fires to begin a game of cat and mouse with the blonde. The skirmishing ninjas were unwilling to commit to an end-all attack due to the hefty amounts of chakra required and the fighting they knew lied ahead with their respective targets. Both combatants faced the identical quandary of swift victory versus conservation of energy. For the battles ahead, when the two male geniuses engaged in their semi-covert warfare, Hinata was busy going head-to-head with the large male who apparently had a mental disorder. The red-headed female wasn't much of a contender, although the Hyuga's attempt at stealth fell flat on its face when she initially confronted the duo. The large boy also possessed some bizarre genetics. He could transform portions of his body into grotesque fleshy weapons, and the blue-haired prodigy couldn't counter them with simple magnetism. She swore under her breath as this Jugo character slammed a bladed arm into the ground from whence she stood. Utilizing her momentum, she swung her unfolded shaft weapon and implanted one of its blades in the older teen's side, or so she thought. Jugo was unfazed by the blow, and as his clothing fell apart, his attacker understood why. A sudden growth had caught the blade before it could do any real damage, and was pushing it away. Hinata activated the small generators lining her armbar's interior and sent a blast of electricity down the elongated weapon, prompting the disturbed boy to quiver as his nervous system took the blow. Her Byakugan, seeing that the Redeed was too far away to be of consequence when a monstrous blade came spinning out of the thick foliage on a vertical path. She hesitated on instinct as the oversized sword passed in front of her, but that extra second was all the berserking opponent needed to recover and fly at her with renewed vigor. "Damn it," she mumbled, twisting back as she planted the blunted tip of her shaft's blade against Jugo's foot to keep him from advancing during her retreat. Her bloodline noted that the loud enemy female had tossed a handful of weaponry at her back, and she was forced to regard said attack, however pitiful it was. Without removing her elongated weapon from the large teen's foot, she turned and, with one hand only, knocked the incoming kunai with precision taps. She cut her index finger a few times, but it was unavoidable. She was up against a small hail of bladed instruments with only one limb free to protect herself. The moment she neutralized the threat, she faced a new one, that of a teen with sharpened teeth, who peered out of a puddle and put her in a headlock. What the shit? She couldn't believe he got so close without her noticing, but a frantic expulsion of electricity shocked the boy so badly that she made her escape into the branches above. Once firmly out of harm's way, she analyzed the situation in 2 heartbeats. "This thing's turning out to be a bother," she concluded, folding up her shafted spear and securing it to her back. "Looks like the third guy came with Sasuke. I hope Naruto's alright." Meanwhile, the Redeed below saw fit to berate the newcomer. "Sujetsu?" she screeched. "What the hell are you doing? You're supposed to be helping Sasuke." "Shut up," he yelled back as he retrieved his sword. "Every time I get close to that guy, he blows me up. I'm taking on this bitch." "Thank you very much." Hinata sighed in relief. "Good. Naruto's alive." She placed her hands together in preparation for one of her numerous water-based techniques when a sudden blast of heat caught her attention. Her superior eyesight saw she leap into action from her hiding place somewhere hidden within the dying fire, with said flames trailing her seal-laden claws. The young girl halted short of Jugo and Sujetsu and thrust her arms forward in a wide arc, the carried fire blasting into the 2 boys with incredible intensity. But the berserking teen wasn't affected much by the attack, as was evidenced by him surging straight out of the conflagration. She, being the more nimble of the 2, dodged with relative ease and ended up joining the Hyuga in the treetops. "Hey, silence," the girl greeted as she squatted on the limb. "Sorry for being so late. I wanted to make sure Curse was okay." "It's fine," Hinata replied as she eyed her young comrade, before glancing back at the enemies below. The Redeed girl was busy staring at Shia with an expression of confusion. "Familiarity? Holy shit," said Redeed, aimed a finger at the masked preteen. "It's you?" Shia squinted behind her mask, then lifted it with a shocked look of her own. "It's you?" Karen silence exchanged glances between the 2 with no small amount of confusion. It finally dawned on her that she used to be with the sound, so it made sense that there might have been 1 or 2 familiar faces hanging around in the world. "You know each other?" "That's Karen. She used to be on Garaza's team." Hinata directed her withheld shock at Karen. "Wait, you knew Garaza?" The Redeed's eyes narrowed as she recalled those days. She had been stationed within the Konoha reconnaissance team at the behest of Orochimaru in order to sow the seeds of mistrust amongst those criminals. "You had hit her." Your silence, aren't you the one and only?" A small amount of pride struck her, and she tapped her armored chest. "But all good things come to an end, and this unusual reunion ended with Jugo launching himself at the treetop Konoichis with modified arms prepared to crush them." Hinata landed on the ground and was greeted by Sujetsu's sword. She was quick enough to activate yin and yang's magnetic force and repel the blade, but the crass swordsman released the weapon when it became too much and landed a kick of unnatural strength against the Hyuga. Silence was a strong girl, but in being female she was genetically predisposed to smaller muscles, whereas Sujetsu was not. The end result of the mighty blow was Hinata skidding across the ground into a tree with the wind knocked out of her. She took a desperate gulp of air and found the water-based ninja following up his disarm barrage with a muscled fist. Silence moved her head to the side the moment said fist plowed into the bark, and she took the opportunity to land a blow no male could withstand. She kicked him in the balls. Sujetsu reacted appropriately by falling to his knees and receiving a powerful blow to the head that would have killed a lesser man. Of course for him, it meant being scattered into droplets, but that still bought the blue-haired prodigy. Hinata put some distance between her and the three assailants before turning to face their general direction. That Sujetsu guy's got a serious advantage with water, she knew, but if I time this right, I won't have to deal with it. Moving her steel mask atop her head, she reeled back to perform the water explosion technique before her Byakugan sensed danger, and she flattened to the ground. An instant later, a massive fireball passed mere inches over her prone body and singed more than a few hairs. What the hell, sorry Hinata? Naruto flew through while unleashing ungodly numbers of weapons at a nearby Sasuke. Setichiha did a marvelous job of avoiding every bladed instrument that he saw. The hails of steel projectiles flying at him from his blind spot were dodged so gracefully. At some point, the rogue ninja was forced to turn his eyes away from the real blonde in order to deal with the onslaught of copies, and that's when the Uzumaki saw his chance. As Hinata scampered to her feet and replaced her mask, Curse brought his hands together in concentration and focused his chakra into a spiraling pattern. A breeze was kicked up behind him as the first of the 9 tornadoes was initiated, and when the portable maelstrom licked the subsiding flames, the interaction caused the entire thing to become engulfed in renewed fire. It also resulted in a feminine yell. She dove from her cover as the flames were born anew and eyed the blonde through a smoking mask. Damn it, Curse, the change in speech signified warn me next time you do that. Sorry, he apologized without moving. By now the rogue Uchiha had noted the blazing tornado and was taking measures to counter it, but the blonde forced him to rush the decision by thrusting the still spinning maelstrom at the enemy. Sasuke swore under his breath. Shit, now I have to use a summon to escape. He prepared to slam his palm to the ground when something flew between him and the vertical twister of fire. Is that a tree? He didn't wait to find out. The self-proclaimed Avenger scrambled to safer ground before the doomed timber was rendered into ash. For a moment there was peace. All parties present wondered how a tree decided to up and fling itself between two combatants. Did you see that? Naruto whispered to Hinata. Yeah, she nodded. Who did that? She inquired in her lowest voice. Oh, that was a good throw. All eyes turned to the sounds of casual applause to find two strangers who looked nothing alike. The one clapping wore snug leather clothes that looked comfortable and warm, while the other wore nothing but frayed woolen pants and knee-high combat boots. The noisy one was a plain man with lanky hair, while his shirtless friend looked more like an animal with his fiery eyes and crimson hair that complemented the lifetime of scars trickling down his exposed torso. That is Gaza for you, the normal one commented in an accent no one could place. Alves vas de strong van. Who are you? Curse asked with no humor whatsoever. These two bothered him more than he cared to admit. The plain man replied in a friendly manner. That is not important. Why don't you kids stop fighting? Fighting is not a good thing. Everyone tensed and regarded the odd duo with apprehensive curiosity when the harmless stranger spared several casual glances between Naruto and Sasuke. What do you want? The Uchiha demanded in his usual cold tone. Something about that giant's blazing eyes and hair reminded him of one of the old sound bases. Forgive our forwardness, but we are simply doing our jobs. Will you mind accompanying us to our destinations? Jugo shivered as his cursed cells overran his mind, and he decided that he'd had enough. His arm mutated into a massive claw and plowed into the silent, scarred stranger only to fly back in the opposite direction. Further observation revealed that his 8-foot target hadn't budged an inch, save an outstretched fist. Sujetsu followed up his massive teammate's attack by swinging his oversized sword into the leather-clad newcomer, neatly bisecting the man through the stomach. Ain't so tough, he mumbled, just the big guy. What? The water ninja velped as he was flung into the air by a collection of scales that hadn't been there a second ago. Sujetsu eyed his supposedly slain target and couldn't believe that the man. He inspected his ruined leather clothing. And I just bought this. He eyed Sujetsu with benevolent eyes and laughed as he scratched the side of his head. Ah, well, the next paycheck will pay for a new one. Naruto decided to test this man's strange abilities by silently directing a clone to lob a man-sized shuriken at him. The copy obeyed, and the huge throwing star sailed right through the guy at a diagonal angle. The Uzumaki squinted to obtain a clearer view of the wound and noted the strings of blood coagulate and harden into the pale green scales before pulling the stranger back together. Is it a bloodline? Or is it something else? Gaza, the man addressed his silent comrade. It looks like we'll have to go to Plan B. Vich Vundu Hyuv, and the crimson-eyed giant glared death at Sasuke in response to his talkative partner. Ah, Josiacha, Zen. Good choice, Hyu have a lot in common. He began unbuttoning his ruined jacket with a pained face. Zen I will assist the Uzumaki. He and noted she is concerned, and nudged her intelligent counterpart. Think we should only focus on this guy? May as well, he whispered back. We've actually seen some of this guy's abilities. The other one's a wild card. The Hyuga nodded in agreement. Gotcha. That makes, her words trailed off when the talkative stranger shed his tattered jacket to reveal his strange scaly appendages holding him together. There was no blood from the wounds, but the ropes of emerald scales writhed and flexed like a serpent preparing to strike. Oh, that's just creepy. The battlefield exploded into chaos when all parties engaged one another. The Konoha ninjas attempted to concentrate on the scaly man, but had a difficult time of it. The rogue sound shinobi weren't so cooperative. Those four would attack anyone nearby who wasn't with them, and their recklessness got the two strangers involved, and their partners claimed. Naruto jammed his modified ninjato into the ground and invoked another pillar of stone to whip around his challenger. The column of earth slammed into the benevolent attacker and flattened him into the ground with a force that would have blown apart a normal man. But the man's would-be blood turned to sharpened scales before it could even settle in the dirt, and the new appendages did something new. They wrapped around the heavy stone and flung it away. The man's hand, now connected to the body by what appeared to be a snake from hell, jerked him from his prone position. The remainder of his legs stood in his body, now more scales than actual flesh, formed from the writhing tentacles of unnatural plates. He eyed the blonde with a pained expression befitting an old man about to extend a gentle lecture to a foolhardy child. Now what was that for? It was quite messy, yeah? With a sudden bout of energy, the enemy leapt at Curse, and his scaly appendages caught the boy's sword without effort, before trapping Naruto in their sharp, graceful grasp. This is why fighting is not a good thing. Violence only begets violence. Now come along. With that, he began dragging the struggling genius away in lieu of a casual Sunday stroll. Both Hinata and Shia rushed in to save the prodigy from his plight, only to encounter the sentient tentacles of razor-sharp plates. The snaky arms flicked off the man's body and held everything thrown at them at bay. That is, until the Hyuga's arm was captured, and she sent a jolt of electricity through her steel arm guard. She had wanted to avoid that, seeing as how the surge would transfer to her beloved, but now there was no choice in the matter. Yo! The man shrieked and froze for the smallest of moments, while every scale jutted outward in reaction to the contained light. The three Konoha shinobi exchanged masked looks of worry and continued their assault on the man. As time went on, their unspoken coordination became better and better. Between the three of them, they had all the elemental affinities covered. Naruto and Hinata would blast the attacker with all manners of fire, wind, water, and lightning, while Shia would manipulate their advances with her peculiar seal work and provide backup with earthen techniques. All in all, it was a perfect defense in the making. It did nothing. The scaly man would not die. He took everything they dished out, and it did nothing to deter his body from regenerating into the plated horror that he was. After being on the receiving end of several particularly nasty fire techniques, there was nothing left of his flesh. He was now a walking nightmare of writhing scale tentacles that lashed out at everything that moved with the sole purpose of capturing it. Hours went by as the trio did battle. Up until now, Naruto and Hinata had been holding back with the idea that they needed to conserve their strength for the inevitable battle within the Rain Village. This is why they didn't obliterate Sasuke and his crew when they first found them. But now that every attack was falling flat, their mounting desperation became evident in the power of their moves. It was only after the Uzumaki unsuccessfully sliced the foreigner to shreds with the second stage of a modified 9 tornadoes technique that they knew they were in trouble. This is bad, the blonde muttered as he skidded to a halt from his retreat from a wave of scales. We just can't kill him. The Hyuga couldn't agree more, but something else was on her mind. He's been don't tell me you didn't notice. Look around. Where Sasuke and his friends. Curse gave the horizon a quick scan and realized the older girl was correct. They had been moving. Before he could continue the conversation, though, he was interrupted by a cavalcade of scales trying to rope him in. He slipped out of their grasp before they could tighten and received several scratches for his trouble. You just don't quit, do you? The writhing monstrosity before them cracked the equivalent of a smile and gave something of a pained look. Why are you making this so hard on everyone? You already knows at you can't hurt me, but you won't even ask why I insist you come with me. A block of stone shot up from the ground thanks to a trap seal set up by Shia and bashed him in the chin to no avail. His scaly figure reformed like nothing had happened. Worse yet, you are so quick to fight. Why? You guys are just kids. Unfighting is a terrible. Jing Silence decided to take the initiative and stayed her hand from another attack. You and your partner have been leading us away from the others. Why, that is simple. Zichia's destination is different from Uzmaki's. Naruto halted in mid-stride and placed his hand on Shia's shoulder in a silent command to hold back. And what's my destination? Rain Village, of course. The trio frowned, and the blonde begged the obvious question, why. The strange man put his hand to his chin and thought, muttering and nodding in thought. I suppose it won't hurt to tell Hayu. After all, once Hayu are delivered, Z job is done. Delivered to Huvel, Z job is for Z Rain Village, but Z Akatsuki commander is Z one who made Z order. The three glanced at each other in bewilderment. This stranger was trying to take them to their own destination by force? And what was all this about being delivered? Hinata opened her mouth to voice these questions. Do you work for the Akatsuki? He laughed like it was one of the best jokes he'd ever heard. Of course not. That do I look like a freak? Poor choice of words, old man. Naruto spoke up. If you're not with the Akatsuki, then who? The scaly man's smile degraded to a grin. I couldn't answer that, even if I wanted to. Now come, he turned to the direction of the Rain Village. We have places to go. Why the hell would we trust you? The blonde spat, his blade never once faltering from its hostile position. We don't know a thing about you and you never will. If everything turns out well. What's that supposed to mean? Hinata was righteously suspicious of this questionable hostile as well. You already know I don't like violence. That my job is to take you to a place you want to go. Then why bother with fighting? You know you can win. The scaly representation of his mouth parted in a smile. Curse, Shia whispered, what do we do? The Uzumaki glanced at the preteen and noticed Hinata's hidden eyes telling him she'd go with his decision. After all, everything was centered on him. What about these two? I'm sure the Akatsuki leader told you to bring me alone. The freak of nature shrugged. My boss never said anything about that to me. Besides, I see no problems. Now come with me, or will I have to drag Hyujier? Curse-eyed the man one final time and made up his mind after several seconds of deep consideration. All right, we'll come along. But make a move, and so help me God. Since the trio had fought for hours against their assailant, while heading towards the Rain Village, it was a short trek for the remainder of the way. The time was spent by the foursome in awkward conversation with the geniuses attempting to pry every little tidbit of information out of the man to no avail. When asked why the Ichigo was led elsewhere, or who he was being delivered to, all the foreigner would say was, "You won't have to worry about that." He downplayed these serious inquiries like they weren't even issues worth mention, and that made the Konoha ninjas worry. When the rain clouds of the city in question appeared overhead, the Hyuga leaned towards Curse and whispered her concerns. Something about this guy's been bugging me for a while. He replied with no small amount of sarcasm. What could it be? She slapped him on the shoulder and continued without taking her pale eyes off the stranger. He never used any chakra during the entire fight. The teen prodigy eyed his female counterpart through mirrored lenses. You can be serious. I am. Then, what the hell could it be? Not even bloodlines work without chakra. Hinata swallowed and put forth her observations. I think it's genetic. Naruto frowned. Biology and the like had never been as high on his repertoire as it had Hinata's. Explained. He never bleeds, right? I think those scales come from some kind of mutation in his blood whenever it comes into contact with oxygen. The Uzumaki nodded while he considered that. But he's got a breath to survive, and that's why I think it's artificial. Someone had to modify his body so he wouldn't suffocate under his own power. So you think someone made this guy? Her head tilted in a nod. That's what I think. The blonde sighed hard. Then let's hope there's not more like him. Hoff arrived. The stranger's voice interrupted the two as they stepped into a clearing. Curse angled his blade at the man and his voice became dark. And now you want to take us directly to the Akatsuki's leader, right? The scaled hostile frowned. Since when did I say that? I merely stated that I will bring Hayu to the Rain Village. Nosing more, nosing less. So my job is complete. Hi, you are at Z Rain Village. A series of explosions rocked the landscape of towers behind him, but did not surprise him in any way. It looks like things are getting hot and heavy. Hi, you may want to hurry. The Uzumaki regarded the man one last time, then rushed forward to make his way to the source of the conflagration. Jiraiya must have been in there somewhere, and he would be damned if the old lech hogged all the glory or died trying. Shia hesitated, unsure of what to do, before taking off after her replacement brother, while Hinata followed up the rear. The Hyuga halted before she was out of earshot of the stranger, and she spared him one final glance. Thanks, she stated, her tone informing him that despite his benevolence, she would never trust him in this life, or the next. The scaly foreigner gave the impression of a smile. Don't jank me, this was a job. Next time, we may not be on the same side. Remember that, young one. Silence gave a curt nod before rushing off to catch up to her beloved, and when she disappeared from view, the strange man turned and disappeared into the forest with a grin of a job well done. As all became quiet save for the patter of rain, a figure stepped into the clearing from a path separate from that the Prodigies took. The character eyed the city under siege and walked forward with great confidence in his stride, the many reminiscent stitches on his body flexing and squirming in preparation. Whoever this individual was, there was a job. Sasuke Uchiha was an irritable young man, to say the least. He was on the warpath at the moment in search of his elder brother, carrying the hopes of seizing vengeance for the death of his clan. His search had stretched out far longer than he'd hoped in terms of time and distance. Karen, he addressed the bespectacled girl without facing her. As he moved, she concentrated for a moment and answered in the negative. Not even a little. It's like he's waiting for us. If the youngest Uchiha hadn't squashed his emotions long ago, he would have smirked. Itachi had been stationary for the past few hours, and although he was a good distance away, that was enough for Sasuke's rising hopes. The sooner I find him, the sooner I can kill him. The rogue team continued their mad dash through the trees when Juugo glanced to the side all of a sudden. Karen noticed the monstrous boy's movements and knew that something instinctive spoke to him. She had been lucky enough to review his case files as of late. Knowing that the man's gut often picked up on the subtlest of dangers, she angled herself into a clear path, closed her eyes, and felt the air for anything out of the ordinary. Sure enough, the cursed boy's genes were correct. There was something headed towards them, or, more specifically, it would cross paths with them. Sasuke. She spoke and got the sight of the leader's eye in response. There's a huge chakra signature that will intersect us if we keep going this way. What is it? He sounded like he couldn't care less. I think it's a summon. The Avenger's dark eyes twitched ever so slightly. No one noticed. What kind of summon? His inquiry sounded more like a command than a question. Karen took a deep breath and focused harder. I'm sorry, she acquiesced after a moment. I can't tell. Jugo's eyes locked onto the path ahead. I can feel the vibrations. It's a frog. Sasuke heard that and flinched. Naruto was in the area? How could that be? He couldn't know where I am, he sneered in his mind, remembering that the blonde in question was no normal ninja. I'll be fine, though. Memories of his bloodline suppressing the demon fox reminded him that the Uzumaki was not an all-powerful being. Far from it, the Sharingan was enough to render the blonde helpless in their last encounter, so surely it could do the same again. I'll just shut down his source of power if when I see him. Sujetsu wondered what contemplations ran through his impromptu leader's head. So we going around, or what? No. Sasuke's voice was ice cold. It's not a danger to us. Naruto almost fell off Kamaka's oversized head, thanks to the mightiest sneeze he'd ever produced in his life. Hey, he addressed the two females behind him with a jovial grin, as he scratched his nose. Stop talking about me. Hinata snorted through her mask, while Shia smiled back. The situation was dark in their minds, and any humor on any level was more than welcome, if only to distract them from the coming storm. The dual Kunoichis had spent the last few hours talking amongst themselves in hushed tones, while the blonde genius struggled to dress himself in his alternate garb, while remaining rooted to the summon. That scenario led to more than a little excess blood in the girls' cheeks, but their masks hid their embarrassment or lack thereof. Shia might have been soft-spoken, but Aya was not. The secondary personality proved this when, during Naruto's eventual battle with his pants, she whooped just go commando. But now that tedious moment was long gone, and as the blonde donned his mask to become Curse, he sat before the females to form a triangle. So, he began, you come up with any plans? Any previous smirks or grins faded behind their visages and were replaced by hardcore poker faces. It's really hard to say. Hinata began, we're just not prepared to move into the Rain Village. We came to hunt Uchiha's. I know, he replied in annoyance, it pisses me off. Who the hell was that old man, anyway? Would he let us go? The Hyuga recalled the ice user's incredible attack. Actually, I think he intended to let you go. His eyes came after me. Remember, he scowled. It was unpleasant thinking that the genius girl could be in the clutches of the enemy. Speaking of which, who do you think that old man works for? One obvious answer came. The battle with pain had not been kind to the aged toad sage. Jiraiya had suffered the loss of his left arm on top of many internal injuries. The multiple bodies of his enemy had overwhelmed him in his most powerful state, and he currently lied as still as possible within his defensive barrier. His mind was cloudy from the blood loss, and his remaining arm shook every time he raised it. He could feel the end coming, and it took every ounce of willpower for him to fight to the last breath. As his lungs heaved for more copper-tainted air, he felt one of the hostile bodies lunge through his barrier with weapon extended. His arm flew to the forefront in reaction, but he knew that irregular spear would impale him before he could do anything about it. However, his role in his own protection was unnecessary. The unusual weapon halted short of his torso, while its owner crashed to the ground with a blur of figures bearing into it. Jiraiya focused and saw techniques of every element boring into his attacker. The corpse's eyes flared from the flames burning in its skull, while its hair twisted in the wind slicing through deceased flesh. Water oozed from every pore and sparked as it came into contact with the ground, and spikes of jagged granite jutted through the skin to ensure the victim's demise. After a mere 3 seconds, the corpse was destroyed in almost every way possible, as far as the elements were concerned. The aging Sanin blinked several times to confirm the sight. It took a panic voice to break him from his stupor. Jiraiya. Naruto's voice rang out as said blonde whipped off his mask. Are you alive? And Naruto? His voice choked. That Hinata rushed to the old man through the barrier as she also removed her steel visage. Her eyes shifted as her bloodline activated, and she began checking the broken man's vitals. Crap, what happened to your arm? She whispered to no one as she sparked her arm to heat it up and cauterize the wound. Hyuga? He barely registered the girl. She looked so different in that bizarre armor. He felt Fukasaku and Shima rustle on his shoulders and turned to them respectively. Who is this girl, Jiraiya? The male toad croaked. Don't tell me you stooped to cradle Robin. Shut it, Pa. The aged frog's wife retorted. Look at her eyes. She's a Hyuga. She's from Konoha. Jiraiya ignored the bickering duo and tried to speak, yelping when Hinata planted a burning palm against the bloody stump of his left arm and sealed the wound in one motion. Why are you here? I thought you were going after Itachi. Something came up, the blonde replied with great haste as he lifted the shell of what was once Pain's summoning body. Who's this guy? He halted his explanation when the body's headband clattered to the ground to reveal an ancient scar in its place. Memories of days gone by flooded back to him, and he realized who the man was, an old adversary from the Fuma clan that attacked him when he first set out on his lifelong journey. Wait, that can be Nagato. His eyes darted to his current pupil, then found the stranger of the group, a strange masked figure standing behind the Uzumaki. He tensed, unsure if it was an ally of Pain or not. He relaxed after a moment when the unknown person removed her mask. It was the brown-haired girl who helped Naruto through his misery when he and the Hyuga were having relationship problems. Said girl followed the blonde's requests with a mixture of obedience and admiration as she broke off from the group to scout the area. When a minute passed, the aging shinobi shook himself back to reality and addressed Shima, while ignoring Naruto's subdued impatience. Could you get this body back to Konoha? You got it, kiddo, the old frog croaked as she leapt off the Sanin's shoulder and onto the fresh corpse. She regarded everyone present as she prepared to puff away with the organic loot. Take care of yourself, Jiraiya grinned with obvious effort and gave her a thumbs up. Fukasaku spoke up before his wife disappeared. Don't you worry, Ma, little Jiraiya and I'll be home before dinner. The following minutes brought Hinata helping Jiraiya to his feet and forcing several compounds, both solid and liquid, down his throat. Shortly after, the old ninja felt somewhat better, if a little worse for wear. The Toad Master wondered how the young Hyuga got so good. Not even Tsunade was capable of making him feel this physically relieved after sustaining so many injuries. I really underestimated these two. Maybe there's a chance we can beat Pain now. He paused, recalling his recent battle with the multiple hostiles. But I doubt all four of us can walk away unscathed. If worse comes to worse, his tired eyes glanced over the young trio, it's not gonna be me. I'd rather die than let one of them fall in my place. Jiraiya, Silence stated her superior's name without the standard honorific, either sign of rushed desperation or acknowledgement as an equal. What can you tell us about the enemy? The aging Toad Master relayed what little he'd learned about Pain to the duo, how he defeated the first three with the help of a little frog genjutsu, the resurrection of said trio, and all the abilities he had witnessed. By the end of his explanation, all three of his saviors had wide eyes and varying levels of gaping mouths. Well, he coughed up a little blood. Both thought for a moment before the Uzumaki broke the silence by turning to Hinata. This place has a lot of water, and you've got that chakra crystal. He tapped yin and yang with his knuckle, so it might be better if you use large-scale techniques. She and I will work around whatever you throw out to fill in the gaps. Jiraiya scrunched up his face. He thought there'd be more to their preparations. You called it a plan? You guys are just winging it. The blonde ninja waved the concern away. Don't worry about it, we're good at improvisation. Besides, the Hyuga added, we've been seeing a lot of things no one can plan for lately. At least this time we have intel. Indeed you do, a foreign voice interrupted, but what good shall it do? All eyes cut to the voice to find not one, but 5 newcomers. Standing resolute and silent as statues, the remaining bodies of Pain regarded the Konoha ninjas with cold Rinnegan eyes. Jiraiya was the first to move. He knew of the dangers affiliated with close-quarters combat on this battleground. But as he scaled the nearest cover, he was surprised to find his student and company doing exactly the opposite of what he considered tactful. They were charging straight into the fray with weapons drawn. Hinata flicked her oversized spear into gear with a single motion and fed electricity to the shaft before gracing the water's edge. In that instant, the lake sparkled with a charge and cleared the immediate area. Seeing as how all combatants present knew the foolhardiness of standing on charged water, Naruto sailed through the air as the Hyuga prepared her next attack, unsealing a man-sized shuriken to fling at his target, the fat Pain. Jiraiya said this one absorbs any technique, so I'm betting physical attacks work. The overweight enemy dodged the incoming weapon with ease, but failed to notice the explosive tags dotting the underside of the ninja star. The airborne metal passed the man, exploded, and shot a chunk through the hostile's hand to sever all but his thumb. The Uzumaki noted the success and thought he felt his lips curl into a grin, but he was too busy dealing with an instantaneous counterattack led by the enemy with long hair. Meanwhile, Hinata had moved from her battlefield of ionized waves onto a massive dislodged pipe that served as a walkway between piles of rubble. She watched with Byakugan eyes as every hostile kept their strange eyes glued to them, affirming Jiraiya's claim that they shared the same vision. We just have to make them look away. Isolate one so we can take them down. An idea popped into her head and she halted in a defensive stance to put her plan in motion. Her hands whizzed through the needed seals, and, as the waves below churned into a magnificent wave, she placed a palm on her energy weapon. The electrified tsunami didn't affect any of Pain's bodies, but it attracted their attention and forced them from their positions. The Hyuga, possessing sight that could penetrate anything, noted enemy movements through the violent waters in search of a viable target. Come one, she whined as the maelstrom subsided. There's gotta be one. There she found her victim and clamped her finger around the trigger as the waters lost their force. With a steady arm, she raised her vibrating weapon at the enemy with spiked ear piercings and bit her lip in her timing. The hostile was the only one looking at her, and his eyes were currently clouded by the last of the wave. Hinata's hand shook as her weapon boiled and convulsed, and the instant she saw the man's eyes she released the trigger. The enemy didn't have a chance. His head disintegrated with the blinding blast, but Silence dropped her weapon and clamped her aching hand. Fuck, she swore aloud. I overheated it too much. A quick glance with an active bloodline told her that her futuristic weapon had fired its last, if repairs weren't made soon. Next time I use it, it'll be a bomb. The sudden elimination of yet another body attracted Pain's attention, and he retaliated by sending the ball body at the Hyuga. The girl did what she could against the— What is that? She wondered in subdued admiration of the bald man's extra faces and emerging mechanical enhancements. But something about the machinery embedded within the body was disturbingly familiar. It reminds me of that mosh mosh kwai from the Sound Army. A few projectiles were launched at her, and she barely got out of the way in time, only to come face to face with the same man who had leapt after her through the fray. Shit! She tried to swing her heavy weapon between them, but the newly grown arms of the mechanical freak halted its movement as the other limbs moved in for the kill, or so it seemed. In the blink of an eye, she appeared from the abyss and landed on the assailant's head. Her engraved claws dug at the man's numerous eyes, but didn't seem to have any effect. If the serrated tail rising behind the young girl was any indication, Shia, the Byakugan user cried, prompting the girl to turn around and yelp as the thin blade plunged forward. Nothing came of it though, as Shia was nabbed by the scruff of the neck and launched into the air an instant before she could be skewered. In her place, Naruto shimmered from an artificial wind and, with his free hand, slammed a basic Rasengan into the man's head. The body crashed to the ground and twitched before the blonde formed a second swirling ball, this one smoking from an unseen fire imbued within the center, and buried it in the enemy's midsection. Cloth disintegrated in the blink of an eye, and the metal frame of the hostel softened, and Curse was followed in his timed attack by the long-haired freak, as well as the disfigured fat one. He had heard Hinata's cry for Shia, and temporarily abandoned his battle with the others to save the girl, and now it was back to bite him in the ass. The slim hostile fell at him from the sky, while the obese freak ran at him on the ground. Naruto's adrenaline-soaked mind slowed things down in his eyes, and he saw that both enemies carried these bizarre weapons that resemble broken shafts of rebar rather than spears. In response, he flung out both arms to his sides, unsealed a quartet of custom three-prong blades from his chain bracelets, and lobbed two of them at the fat one, before charging forward with the remaining knives. The target of the unique projectiles had no problem knocking the blades away with his spear, but when the overweight ninja reeled back to drive his weapon into the approaching Uzumaki, the blonde leapt, utilized his face as a stepping stone, and went airborne to intercept the thin man. The gravity-defiant battle commenced between the Konoha ninjas and the remnant of Pain's bodies. The former corpse, once known as Yahiko Pain's preferred vessel, stood atop a squat structure near the water's edge in passive observance. The man had his orders from the top: capture Naruto Uzumaki at all costs, but something was off. The fact that the blonde boy was putting up such a fight didn't surprise him, nothing really did, but the presence of the Hyuga female as well as the familiar brown-haired girl was curious enough to make him stop and watch from afar. Konan finally made her way to the scene and stood next to Pain without a word. She wondered why her comrade refused to enter the fray, but before she could ask, she frowned in recognition of the youngest ninja dancing through the sky of ninja stars. Pain, her voice was level like it always was. Is that girl who I think it is? He said nothing as he thought back to days gone by. Yes, it appears the last of the split minds has returned home. What do you plan to do about it? Nothing. Kurin was unable to perfect his family's one soul seal, so his younger sister could not possibly. He stopped and looked off to the side. Konan could sense something was up. She had spent too much time with her comrade to not pick up on his stoic mannerisms. What's wrong? It's nothing. An intruder has been spotted near the tower. The tower? The one where you are, Nagato. He glanced at her with cold-ringed eyes. Yes, but the guards are taking care of it. It's nothing. When the battle wound down and left the Konoha trio victorious, it was not without a price. While the first two enemies had gone down with little effort, the others seemed to gain the strength of the fallen and fight with renewed vigor. This led to the conclave within the forest of towers riddled with burns and scorches, and endless rows and layers of weapons had all but exhausted the Uzumaki's supply of sealed armaments. The teen himself was not as winded as his teammates, but then again he had the advantage as far as chakra was concerned. When the dust and waters settled, Hinata searched the area with her superior vision to find Pain and some woman watching the aftermath from a low-lying atoll. She focused and found Jiraiya's whereabouts. Good one. Jiraiya deciding to give the old man the time he needed, she shouted across the distance. Your Pain, right? I am. His quiet response was barely audible. Where did you get this guy? She kicked the side of the bald hostel's head with her steel boot, eliciting a metallic ring. He's too high-tech. Nothing for a moment. He is but one of my forms. Silence rolled her eyes and Curse intervened. What a load. You expect us to believe you're more than one guy. A god has no need to explain his actions. The blonde cocked an eyebrow. Great, another nut, he muttered. Don't lie. You found this guy or built him more? It is true. Hinata frowned and thought. Mosh, in his own right, was a technical marvel as well. Then there was the shadow man who butchered the secret sound army so many years ago, and what about the strange surgeon, and that pale man in the suit who infiltrated her lab through a ball of light? And then there were those strangers who attacked Tsunade and Jiraiya, and everyone else who was involved in the ring of conspiracies beneath Konoha, and the Akatsuki still got the only other Sharingan we know of. This has got to be more than coincidence. Before Naruto could prolong his tirade, the Hyuga spoke up in his place. She remembered what they sought in the first place as well as their ultimate reason for doing so. What is the Omega Project? For once, Pain seemed to be rendered speechless. Hinata continued. I know this guy isn't yours. She kicked the mechanical marvel's inanimate head. We know several people like this, and none of them have anything to do with you. So whoever or whatever this thing is, it's related to the Omega Project, and you're the only organization around that still has secrets. Another moment of silence passed. I concede. Pain dipped his head. It is true that one of my forms was not of my own doing. But because of the man he once was, I would not have known of the one who possessed the weapon. So the Omega Project is a weapon. I have never heard of this Omega Project you speak of, but the weapon belonging to this organization is not of our making. Of this much, you can be certain. Naruto snorted. Something didn't feel right. Why are you telling this to us? We're enemies. The pierced man closed his eyes in reflection. There is no need to hide secrets from those who will perish soon. And with that phrase, Jiraiya burst from the waters behind Pain with Hinata's discarded energy weapon in hand. He aimed the device at his former student and, mirroring the Hyuga's movements, pulled the trigger to build up the charge. Pain responded by swiveling on his heel and releasing a blast that repelled the Sannin. But when the Toad Master hit a distant pipe, he disappeared in a puff of smoke. Air placement. Pain's stoic mind registered the move before he turned around again to find another Jiraiya, the real one, standing before him with the glowing weapon. Thanks for the distraction, Hinata. The elderly ninja silently thanked the Hyuga for filling the air with inane chatter while he snuck up behind Pain. He knew from his previous battle with this particular body that an initial attack would fail without the element of surprise. His only other option was to force Pain to use his technique and follow up with another near-simultaneous attack. He had watched Hinata use this strange weapon and noted the time it took to build up power before discharging, so he knew he could kill Pain before the man had enough time to replenish his strange technique. His finger remained on the trigger as the tool vibrated to unbearable heat, and another millisecond would pass before his former pupil's head melted in a blast wave, but it never happened. The weapon continued to charge and spark in a violent rumble when Pain's power activated once again. In another blast, the renowned Toad Hermit went flying with the failing energy weapon still in hand, aware that something was wrong with the device despite his ignorance of its inner workings. Jiraiya, Hinata called, horrified that the old man had picked up her weapon without realizing its volatile state. Throw it away? Now Jiraiya's sharp mind concluded that the Hyuga statement meant an explosion or some kind of backfire that required distance for safety would take place. Without question, he lost. Pain's power had regenerated once again and allowed him to fling the ordnance back at his old teacher before the device exploded in a brilliant flash of color and simmering heat. In an instant, Jiraiya was consumed by the conflagration before his singed corpse fell into the bottomless sea and sank beneath the waves. Hinata couldn't believe it. Jiraiya was dead. Just like that. There was no grand battle, no climax in the fight of a lifetime. He made a mistake and it backfired, the simplest notion on earth. She blinked and turned to Naruto alongside Shia. Uzumaki stood still while watching the disturbed waves. There were no tears in his eyes, no sadness, only disbelief. Jiraiya muttered under his breath, reality taking its time to sink in. But when it did, his azure eyes scrunched into anger, and he glared at Pain with fiery rage. "You," he shouted as he took up his custom ninjato, "this is your fault?" He ran at the man without thinking, his movements fueled more by emotion and unconscious training rather than logic. The old hermit was the closest thing to a father he'd ever had, and the Hyuga and Shia ran after the blonde to assist against Pain, and the woman who apparently utilized paper in creatively lethal ways. What followed was a battle that, despite the Konoha ninja's mild fatigue, surpassed the previous. Naruto reused almost every weapon he'd expelled mere minutes ago, and the air was filled with fire and water and dust and steel. Paper was burned, soaked, and sliced into shrapnel, while liquid fire and airborne waves crushed concrete into dust. Fighting took place beneath the endless waves, as well as on their surface. Combatants danced around chakra and iron up the sides of never-ending obelisks, and rooftops caved under the pressure of forces not foreseen in their architecture. The sky changed color several times as flames and lightning stretched into the eternal clouds, and rain was turned to ice and poison and came from all sides, but a simple glare of the Rinnegan repelled all like flowers in a maelstrom. This contained war continued on for either minutes or hours. Time stood still for its participants. Every time the blonde genius neared Pain and struck, his blade came closer. Even the almighty Rinnegan could see that this boy was learning the limitations of a self-proclaimed god. It was only a matter of time until the Uzumaki exacted his revenge. Such vengeance came when Naruto finally caught Pain off guard and thrust his ninjato into the man's spine from behind. Although the boy's anger was still hot and his sadness profound, the sight of Pain's pierced body gave him the smallest degree of comfort. But the blonde couldn't rest. The enemy's body burst into a cavalcade of paper. A replacement? Curse realized his blind spot and whipped around in place to find his target ready to plunge several sharpened rods into his body. I can't counter all of them in time, however, the strikes never came. Before Naruto could even blink, an auburn blur flashed before his eyes, and his face was splattered with warm liquid. He glanced down to find the spear's tips dripping with dark crimson as they protruded from his savior's back. Shia, he cried when it hit him what had happened. Shia had placed herself in harm's way and took the mortal blows meant for him. He thrust his sword around the impaled girl in retaliation, but Pain simply leapt to safety well away from the duo as the Uzumaki cradled the girl and put distance between them. When Naruto's panicked mind thought he was safe enough, he laid Shia on the cold ground, oblivious to Hinata's attentiveness. "Shia," He stumbled, wanting to say more, but finding no words to convey his shock. The young girl coughed up a slew of blood, but smiled at the blonde nonetheless. Curse, her voice was weak. Are you okay? He hovered over her with tears in his eyes. Jiraiya hadn't passed on for but an hour, and now it was Shia's turn to perish. He couldn't believe it. He didn't want to. I'm fine, he sputtered, his mind moving a mile a minute. Don't talk, save your energy. It's fine, she countered as dark blood snaked from the corners of her lips. This is it for me. As her words left her mouth, she gave silence the briefest of glances, and saw the desperation in the older girl's eyes, evidence that there was nothing the Hyuga could do. You'll make it. The blonde moved his shaky fingers through the girl's hair. Hinata'll heal you good as new, right Hinata? She'll be fine, right? It was an arbitrary question he was repeating himself, a telltale sign that even he knew the end was nigh. Hinata locked eyes with Naruto, but said nothing. Her Byakugan saw that almost every vital organ was pierced. Shia would bleed out long before any patches could be applied in the necessary places. The Hyuga curse saw the resignation in Silence's eyes, and it confirmed his fears. In the back of his head he knew this wouldn't end the way he wanted, but he was desperate. Fully aware of Shia's limited time, he turned back to the dying girl's smiling face and started crying. He couldn't help it. Shia's breathing calmed as she raised weak hands to the blonde's cheek. Please don't cry. Her smile never left as she stroked the boy's face. It doesn't hurt anymore. I just feel tired. Naruto swallowed another onslaught of tears, took the palms caressing his cheeks, and gently removed the intricate steel claws to reveal the warm fingers underneath. The feel of her skin reminded him of every moment he spent with her, and every frustration that he'd ever had with her melted away. Remembered how she'd become a part of his life as much as Hinata had, and every memory, both good and bad, rushed back to remind him how important she was. He recalled her smiles and laughter as vividly as her tears and sadness. He remembered pulling her from the pit of despair as well as her comfort during his own time of need. She met his greatest secret with a smile, forgave him when he broke her heart, and stayed with him without hesitation when he could offer nothing in return. Shia, he placed his forehead against hers, his tears dropping onto her face. I don't want to lose you. To the dying girl said nothing as she curled her hands around the blonde's head and lowered him into a kiss. Everything tasted like copper, but to her it was the sweetest thing she'd ever experienced. When she released him, she gazed at him with blurring eyes. I'll always love you, Naruto. Despite his sadness, the Uzumaki blinked. This was the first time Shia had ever addressed him by name. He couldn't explain it, but that act alone took some of the sting out of the moment, while swelling it with grief all at once. I'll always love you too, Shia. I'll never forget you. She smiled one last time. And I'll always be watching over you, brother. And with that, her eyes fluttered shut. A second passed, and before Naruto's tears could renew, her eyes opened again. I almost forgot, the young girl stated with heavy breath. Aya. Naruto recognized those angled eyes. Why, you're not dead, don't be stupid. Her personality remained indignant as always. I'm following Shia. She just forgot something. The blonde frowned, but didn't let his puzzlement get in the way of the extra seconds given to him to say goodbye. What is it? She raised her weak hand and planted her index finger on his chest. It's a gift of one soul. The last of her chakra made its way through the appendage and burned into Naruto's flesh, creating a pattern as Aya's digit moved with deliberation. After a few seconds, her hand crashed to the ground in exhaustion, and she sighed. There, God, it. The blonde examined the scar for a moment. It was a simple tattoo carved into his chest. He had no idea of its purpose, but it mattered little. Aya, he turned to the second personality to say his final farewell before being cut off. You'll need these. She nudged her ornate claws at him. Wear them when the seal's active. It won't work otherwise. Aya, his eyes felt heavy with more moisture. Saying goodbye once was hard enough, but now he had to say it twice to what amounted to the same person. I love you. Aya's lips curved into a subdued smile, and she reached for the blonde's face. I do too. She couldn't quite reach, but when Curse guessed what she wanted, she stole a kiss as well. When she broke the intimate gesture, she continued, thanks for being there for me. The Uzumaki couldn't trust his voice and nodded as he choked and hugged the girl on the ground. Silence. Aya addressed Hinata verbally. She couldn't see anything anymore. Take care of Naruto for me. The Hyuga nodded as she ran her cool palm over the dying girl's forehead. I promise. Aya. The alternate minced smiled for the final time and closed her malfunctioning eyes. Naruto felt the slowing movement and raised himself to find her face serene. Aya whispered to no one in particular as her chest rose for its finale, free at last, and with that, Aya departed from the mortal plane. Seconds felt like hours and minutes felt like eternity itself as Hinata scooted to Naruto's side and embraced him. The Hyuga rocked back and forth as one would with a child, while the Uzumaki clenched his teeth and wept through closed eyes. No one said anything for a while, and the silence was filled with the lonely sounds of the blonde's choked cries. Silence knew they didn't have much time before pain located them, and that they should be keeping an eye out for him, but the near-simultaneous loss of Jiraiya and Shia was enough to humble her. And if even I'm sad, I can't even imagine what it's like for Naruto. Sure enough, a familiar presence landed behind them, and was followed by a monotone voice. I see you understand true pain, the head of the Akatsuki spoke. This is one thing everyone has in common. It is a terrible thing, yet it helps us grow, and mature Curse didn't listening to Pain's lecture. He could hear the man speaking, but everything was disregarded. Instead, the blonde stood to his feet while cradling Shia's corpse, walked to the edge of the platform where concrete met endless water, then placed the girl's body on the surface with the utmost care. I can't give you a burial back home, he spoke to no one in particular, but at least you'll go where no one else can. He relinquished his hold on her body and placed a final kiss on her forehead before Shia sank beneath the waves. He then turned to Pain and slowly donned the last reminder of his adoptive sister, the claws embroidered with her personal seals. As the warm steel slipped over his fingers, the extra grooves in the interiors of the weapons did little to alleviate the fresh agony of losing their creator. When Naruto completed the task, he stood opposite Pain and regarded him with blank eyes, the only kind of emotion he could muster for now. Hinata. Yes, take care of that paper woman. I'll take him. The Hyuga gazed at the Uzumaki with soft eyes before activating her bloodline to find Pain's ally. She knew fighting such dangerous individuals one-on-one was foolhardy, but she felt that nothing was more appropriate given how much the blonde went through in the last hour. This is something he needs to do, no matter what happens. As silence leapt into the vertical maze of buildings for Conan, Naruto sought out the new seal's presence within his body. It didn't take long to find it, and the moment he did, he began feeding his bottomless chakra into it. Pain, he stated in a raspy tone as his body began to change, you better pray you're a god. The man's Rinnegan eyes narrowed. And why is that, Naruto Uzumaki? Because only a god could survive what I'm about to do to you. Deep within the confines of Naruto's soul, the nine-tailed fox rattled its cage with all its might, shrieking with every breath its massive lungs could handle. What have you done, you fool? It screamed as infinite rows of light threading around its body dug into its flesh, as well as the silent and sullen Uzumaki before the cell's bars. Do you know what this is? The prison shook with the force of 1,000 earthquakes as the fox struggled against the ephemeral coils. But for all its strength, the monster couldn't do it. The simple mark carved into its host's chest burned its way into its forehead before doing the same to Naruto. I can't believe that damn girl did it. I can't believe you let her. In the back of its mind, the ancient entity knew the blonde was too depressed and angry to argue. In a way, its age-old psyche knew that there was nothing it could do to prevent these endless ropes of light from connecting its body to that of its vessel, but that did nothing to silence the demon's curses before its mouth was swallowed up. Don't you do it, boy. Don't you dare do it. Seconds later, the chamber was aglow with the illumination of 1,000,000 suns, and the afternoon sun descended into the horizon, its luminescence diluted by the dissipating rain clouds hovering over the rain village. Its scant rays plastered the desolate city in light so often lost in the downpour, and the many towers of the landscape rippled within the contrast of warm glows and cool shadows. What little of the brilliant star that was visible could be called beautiful, a magnificent omen to the end of another day. But no one was looking, and the sinking sun also heralded the end of more life. Two figures stood opposite each other within a clearing of wreckage, steel rebar and arching obelisks replacing the grassy knolls and ancient trees of Konoha. Pain loomed over a squat bunker that survived the onslaught, and the endless waters around his raised concrete island churned against the submerged platform upon which the Uzumaki resided. The self-proclaimed deity stared ahead with cold, lifeless eyes as the boy before him stated threats and made nary a sound. He was prepared, and certain that nothing this blonde child ever did could result in anything other than failure. To be sure, the boy stood a chance against this singular body, but then what? Pain was everlasting. How could a mortal, no matter his strength, hope to defeat a concept, much less a god? As Pain waited with patience unmatched, Naruto felt his body burn from within. His chakra trickled into the foreign presence of Shia's seal, and his fingers tingled with a numbing sensation as his chest grew heavy. Seconds passed, and he could no longer feel his hands. He glanced down to find the embroidered steel dressing his fingers glowing and smoking. When he realized this was from an impossible heat, he lurched forward as his innards were consumed by unseen fires. Strange, he thought before his mind became a tumultuous mess. It doesn't hurt that much. No sooner had that notion passed than a wave of sensations hit him. His body convulsed with increasing violence, and every possible emotion, sadness, confusion, love, anger, slammed into his brain like 1,000 blades. It took every ounce of concentration to remain on his feet, staggering in place to stay upright. The fact that the weight of the universe bore down on his shoulders helped none. His cheeks felt like they were being carved with a million dull daggers, and it might have been true. He felt his face with clawed fingers and brought his hands back to reveal blood that boiled and evaporated on both the steel weapons and his skin. His chest heaved with labored breathing, and his face felt like it was being pulled forward, while his skull backward. He squinted and twitched his eyes. It felt like all the moisture had dried into molten lava. Leaning forward to view himself from the water's surface, he noticed blood dripping from under his eyelids and sizzle as they fell into the steaming liquid. No sooner had he seen himself than the waters at his feet bubbled away under the wave of heat that washed over him. As the shallow waters evaporated, the feeling of indescribable heaviness lifted and he felt empty. His appearance no longer mattered to his transformed mind, and, try as he might, he was incapable of feeling more than one thing at a time. He straightened and faced his enemy, and his features hardened into simple raw conviction. Pain looked on with mute interest at the boy standing before him. The Uzumaki had changed little in overall appearance, but what few transformations that took place drastically altered the boy's persona. Naruto now stood with sunny hair that floated in the breezeless wind with a mind of its own. His crimson pupils were surrounded by veins so bloodshot they appeared to be floating in a sea of pulsing crimson, and the previously unpronounced whisker birthmarks had grown and etched themselves deep within his cheeks, closing the gaps with coagulated blood. The smoke gurgling from his lips suggested changes from within, but to any unaware individual it was a sign of something demonic. But even as different as these features were from those of a man, there was an unmistakably human emotion drilled in the blonde's eyes, something even Pain could recognize given his divinity. Hate. Pure, unadulterated, mature hatred, rage so deep that it transcended the heat of passion and cooled into the hardest steel. I see that pain has helped you grow, the bearer of the Rinnegan stated. Curse remained motionless and silent for a moment before opening his smoking mouth and releasing a blast of liquid fire that almost engulfed Pain. Only the Akatsuki leader's power saved the man, and even then he had to rush out of the way before the continued. Pain watched with blank eaves as the tower collapsed on his target and felt a twinge of relief when the dust cleared to reveal his quarry safe. He made no note of the fact that the Uzumaki's outstretched hand had caught the building before it crushed him, but Pain wasn't one to be surprised by any show of strength. It seems you have tapped into more of the fox's power, but tell me, why does it not cloud your mind? Naruto glared at his enemy with empty hate and released a single blast from his 9 tornadoes technique into the tower resting on his hand. The steel and concrete shattered into 1,000 pieces, then twisted in an artificial wind created by the single tornado. The blonde sent a meager shot of chakra into the fledgling maelstrom, and the technique tripled in size and strength, dismembering the tower and adding its debris to the spinning air. When the cloud of airborne metal and asphalt cast a solid shadow over the prodigy, the boy made a single statement in a voice that spoke in both a rasp and a rumble. There's nothing more to say. Die. With that, he gave a curt nod and the Pain activated a strong wave of his repelling technique and cast the impromptu shrapnel back the way it came, but the tornado itself needed little time to recuperate before coming for him again. His ability hadn't the time to recharge, so he dropped off the platform and plunged into the water below before the maelstrom could connect. This bought him the extra second he needed, and he prepared to propel himself towards the blonde beneath the turbulent waves. His plan would have been adequate if it hadn't been for the sudden gush of water that blew him out of the unending lake. Pain's stolen body flung itself from the sudden waterspout, stuck to the lake's surface via chakra, and eyed the unwelcome tornado. The second one. He squinted, and his Rinnegan noted the rotation of energy running through the twin squalls. There were 2 continuous waves of chakra, both wind affinity rotating in convoluted pillars that eventually contracted and connected to the Uzumaki's spine. Like a tail, the curious thing was that during all this time, Naruto hadn't budged an inch. He didn't even turn in place. His cold, seething eyes locked on Pain as the man leapt about the area, and he rotated his head to keep up with him, but anything more was apparently a hassle. Pain knew this kind of behavior was abnormal, and this led him to wonder about the seal glowing in his target's chest. I see. Kuren's sister was able to recreate the one soul seal. His ringed eyes trailed to the smoking claws worn by the prodigy, and he dissected the marks in an instant. But it is imperfect. It requires stabilization seals as well. His analysis gave birth to a plan, something he needed now that he was but one body. If one of those seals is removed, I may not even have to deal with Naruto Uzumaki. The fox would likely consume him, and I know how to contain the beast. If Pain could smirk, he would have produced an evil grin from ear to ear. Little time was wasted as Pain leapt into action. Like most of his schemes, it was simple. Dodge and weave his way to the blonde while using his repelling ability as needed. The scattered debris was enough to provide split-second cover and allow him to hide, should the tails be too much for him. For a few seconds, the plan worked. Pain closed in on the boy and could see the crimson pulsing through his eyes. Incorporeal winds whipped around him as he created a veritable shield around his body with the repelling technique, and when he neared the prodigy he reeled back with one of his many disfigured pikes to ram it through his target's chest. But this is where the plan fell apart. As the weapon flew for the Uzumaki, the aforementioned genius reached out a clawed hand and cobbled the tip of the spear as if it were no more than a spoon. Naruto's bloodstained eyes never moved from Pain's, and the boy forced the self-proclaimed god to retreat with a blast of wind. As before, Pain was able to avoid instant dismemberment, but he was too close to remain on solid ground. The Rinnegan-armed corpse flew through the air on the momentum of the sudden gust, and noted yet another tornado forming. That makes 3 upon landing. He reached down, picked up a handful of screws left over from the collapsed building, and launched them at the boy using his handy technique. Curse knew the projectiles wouldn't miss, so he made no attempt to move. Rather, his feet remained cemented to the ground while his 3 maelstroms curled around him and knocked the bolts from the air. As soon as the path was cleared, he sent a smidgen of chakra into his existence squalls to redirect them at Pain, but the moment they did so, another screw squeezed through the opening. The so-called deity had held one back. But Naruto was undeterred. The Akatsuki leader faced a tough choice: repel the oncoming superheated spittle or save his technique for the slower yet tortuous winds. But he wasn't renowned for killing the great Hanzo for nothing. There was always an alternative option. He reached for a stray concrete block and tossed it in the nearing projectile's path. Following the many spins of the block with superior eyes, he noted that the steaming paste struck it at an angle. It melted through the concrete like so many layers of paper, but its trajectory was altered enough so that he could move his head out of the way and use his technique on the triple tornadoes. Said attack struck Pain on 3 sides and ground the concrete at his feet to dust, but Naruto couldn't find his nemesis after the cloud had settled. The blonde sniffed the air a few times and turned his head to find his target thrusting yet another bizarre spear at his face. As before, he caught it with casual fingers and delivered a countering maelstrom from his hand. Surely Pain wouldn't pull off the same stunt twice, and he didn't. The stolen corpse disappeared from view in a puff of smoke. The Uzumaki didn't flinch in the least, but he wondered how this one-trick pony did it. He sniffed the air again, this time taking in a deep drawl. There, that was how he did it. EWO sensed. Atop one of the standing towers, a cloaked figure popped into existence next to another just out of sight of the devastated battlefield. Pain's possessed corpse glanced at its savior to find a young female with numerous piercings, the reincarnation of his summoning body. He briefly noted the fresh studs protruding from her flesh, knowing that her initiation was rushed. Hopefully that wouldn't be an issue. The corpse of Yahiko then redirected its cold gaze towards the waterlogged clearing in which the blonde resided. The Uzumaki has grown strong. He knows. Yes, the woman's steady voice affirmed the order. She placed her hands together for another summons, but a sudden breeze kicked up and caught her attention. Her ringed eyes aimed upward alongside her male counterpart, and she stared at the turbulent sky. The atmosphere twisted as 5 separate tornadoes clutched for the dismal clouds from the choked roots of obelisks. Upon finding the cold air, the maelstroms converged at their tips and increased tenfold as they sucked each other, and the stormy clouds ripped apart under the monstrous force, and the twisters spun to impossible speeds. This alone was an incredible sight for the city's panicked inhabitants, but Pain wasn't even fazed. He didn't even blink when flames fueled by the wind's power crept up the tendrils into the chaotic sphere. The blazes ignited everything they touched, and once they came together in the rotating orb of air in the sky, they burned with azure fire. Pain's stolen corpses shared blank gazes, and the newest of them spoke the obvious. This could be problematic. The afternoon sun was no longer the only star in the sky. Hinata wove around the airborne razors. Normally she wouldn't have bothered so much getting out of the way of projectiles, but this time Yin and Yang's magnetic field was useless. Who could have known paper could be used as weapons? What was even more aggravating was that her opponent could fly. The woman was able to manipulate paper into any form imaginable. The Hyuga knew all it would take was one water technique to end everything, but she's so damn hard to hit. Conan unleashed another salvo of paper shuriken at the prodigy, and silence ducked behind a pipe protruding from the base of a building. Byakugan active, Hinata unlatched Yin and Yang from her back and uncurled the curved blades along its circular edge while waiting for an opening. When such an opportunity presented itself, she dove from cover, took aim with the film on her hands sparkling, and launched the device at the enemy. Pain might have possessed his own sense of gravity, but Silence knew how to manipulate magnetic fields. The spinning machine dug into the woman's shoulder, and the Hyuga gave a mental cheer. Sadly, it didn't last. Conan burst into a slew of paper. Shit, a substitute. Her bloodline alerted her to movement in her blind side, so she spun on her heel with her oversized shaft weapon's razor tip ready for action. Paper shreds were strewn about the impromptu arena, either to rest on the ground or twisting in the wind. It was all the Byakugan could do to spot an attack that could emanate from nowhere in an instant. Another maelstrom of paper pulled together to form Conan, and a wave of the sharpened pulp shot out from under her feet. Hinata sidestepped the attack and was met with a storm of paper lashing out at her from the ground. The girl's armor reflected the strikes with nothing more than scratches, but the film at her joints weren't so durable, and her flesh felt hot and slick from multiple cuts. It demanded a disturbing amount of concentration to avoid dismemberment, and the Hyuga cursed under her breath that she didn't drop her bladed shaft when she had the chance. If this keeps up without a break, a sudden flash of light in the sky dimmed the assault as it caught the female's attention. Conan's eyes widened as she gazed upon the burning sphere in the sky, and, although her Byakugan was enough, Hinata couldn't help but stare at the fireball directly. Milliseconds felt like minutes, and the Konoha genius's lips curled into a smile. "Thanks, Naruto." Silence released her high-tech spear and slapped her bleeding hands together. A moment later, the unending waters swirled around her position and soaked the surrounding area. Her cut stung under the moisture, but at least the paper was too drenched to continue. Conan didn't manage to avoid being soaked herself, but she did manage to put some distance between herself and the Hyuga. Annoyed that a number of her weapons were temporarily out of commission, she raised her hand and summoned the dry paper still strewn about the area to surround her enemy. "I should have ended this quickly," she bemoaned her weakness. "This fight just got that much harder." Meanwhile, Hinata noted the air around her spinning with uncountable slips of paper. Her Byakugan could see the chakra circulating within the unending chain of pulp, and she knew another grand water technique would do little to stem them. Conan's technique was more nimble, and her control over the paper. Naruto's bloodshot eyes glanced back and forth in search of the elusive pain, though his feet remained steadfast. He knew that, if the man wanted him, he'd come to him, so there was no reason to take a single step. As the boy's chakra fed into the 5 tornadoes, and, by proxy, the massive Rasengan created by their skyward union, a tiny voice made itself heard in his mind. He struggled to hear it, and that was a foreign feeling to him. The illogical portion of his brain whispered that he should move, concoct a plan, set an ambush, something, anything. But the moment he acknowledged the idea, he stopped caring about it. His comrade reigned his mind with unquestionable authority, and even though the enemy was nowhere in sight, the irresistible urge to kill him remained. He could not focus on anything other than pain, not the man's absence, not his techniques, not even how he could be killed. The only thing that Naruto could fit into his brain was that the man was a target and must be eliminated. Even when he idly wondered if Hinata was safe, it felt as though she was a secondary concern that wasn't of immediate importance. Curse knew the sudden inability to focus on more than one thing at a time wasn't right. This had to be a side effect of Shia's seal, the fox's soul, or both. The rage in his veins squelched his musings as quickly as they arose, and the cold fires of anger raged anew the instant he recalled his surrogate sibling. His mood seemed to reflect itself in the 9 tornadoes technique, as if by command. Fire snaked from his lips and wove into the twisters, burning hotter as the winds fanned them. When they touched the massive orb in the sky, the thing became saturated in hellish fire, casting its heat as far as it could travel. Naruto eyed the flaming Rasengan in the sky, and his steady fury found another outlet. With a tiny twitch, a 6th tornado sprang to life from the blonde's body and arched upwards for the spinning fireball. The instant before it came into contact, the Uzumaki eased in a sudden glut of chakra into the newest maelstrom, then pierced the orb with it. Because of the extra chakra, the 6th tornado didn't become entangled within the windy sun. Rather, it punched straight through and descended on the city with the perpetual fires of an artificial blast furnace within its column. The searing twister tore through a cavalcade of towers, tearing them to pieces and reducing them to slag in a heartbeat. The offensive tornado could not extinguish its source of heat due to the impromptu Rasengan feeding the flames, and since Naruto now possessed bottomless power, the flaming maelstrom continued its savage trek through the rain village. Naruto knew the chances of it killing Pain were minimal at best, but his enraged mind didn't care. If there was anyone dear to Pain as much as Jiraiya and Shia were to him, Curse vowed they would die before the man's eyes, before he burned with them, even if he had to melt the city to the ground. Before the airborne furnace could complete a full circuit of devastation, Pain appeared opposite the attack atop an unscathed tower. The blonde ninja noted the man's existence and redirected the fiery whirlwind at him, but it was slow. The flames weren't as swift as he anticipated due to the sheer amount of power transferred from the foe sun through the tornado. The assault still liquefied any metal in its lumbering path, but not before a presence caught the boy's attention. Naruto glanced at a sudden cloud of smoke to find a massive chameleon pop into existence, cocking his head by a millimeter in a rare show of intrigue. The summon immediately blended into its surroundings, but not before a newly minted seventh tornado separated from the Uzumaki to hunt it down. The blonde sniffed the air and directed his newest maelstrom with his eyes. The vertical storm twisted and convulsed along its path, shredding any loose panels alongside the wrecked buildings in search of its target. Naruto heard an inhuman shriek and saw an inkling of blood as his attack located its prey, but he had to avert his bloodshot eyes once more when another threat descended upon him. Pain had taken the momentary distraction to advance on the boy. He knew that particular summon was unintentionally meant to call the Cerberus, but he supposed that an invisible target was just as effective. I was afraid of that. The summoning body was too rushed. But rather than dwell on a single mistake, Pain's preferred body raised a twisted pike against the blonde, the crooked tip aimed at the boy's neck. As before, Pain was forced to retreat, but this time he utilized his gravitational powers to launch the spike at the boy. Before moving from harm's way, Curse responded by lowering his head and catching the weapon with blackened teeth. He twitched his head to the side, and the seventh tornado broke away from its hunt, shredding away the chameleon, and whirled around to attack Pain. It only took a moment, but the enemy evaded death by being summoned away again. Naruto redirected his cold gaze to the highest tower available before repurposing his newest tornado into a maelstrom of fire. He idly noted that Pain had just used a guerrilla tactic with a single ally. This was most likely to buy time until help arrived, but that train of thought derailed almost as soon as it began plucked the bizarre weapon from his teeth and stared at it, its appearance familiar. After a moment, he matched it to the color and texture of the piercings lining Pain's face. While he didn't understand or take the time to contemplate the weapon's use, he figured that removing them from the enemy would probably give him some sort of advantage. With Curse initiated the eighth and final tornado and rushed it into the airborne Rasengan, lighting it aflame alongside its brethren. Then he pumped a massive glut of chakra into everything connected to him, and the storm bulged with power. The Rasengan spun harder and faster and hotter, and the burning maelstroms feeding into it flexed and enlarged with increased speed and heat. The teen moved his arms out a little, and the massive technique squashed downward. The foe sun lowered into the cityscape, while its airborne furnaces stretched outwards to create rings of fire that extended further and further into the city. Water smoked and evaporated, concrete foundations blackened and cracked, and steel glowed and buckled under the impossible heat. With haphazard manipulation, the blonde flicked the streams of spinning fire into the wreckage around him, toppling mighty towers and smelting debris into glass. The dry air burned and crackled, the mounting heat transforming Naruto's location into an earthbound vision of hell. For a while, the Uzumaki could not sense Pain at all. Neither the original Rinnegan user or his summoning ally were within sight, and his nose, while only marginally better than an Inuzuka's, could not detect their stench above the smoldering ashes and billowing smoke. He briefly considered that he may have lost Pain, but he never once considered moving from his position. A figure appeared on the outskirts of the devastation, and was followed by another and then two more. Naruto glared at the shadows and recognized his enemies, but this time Pain and his summoning cohort were joined by the paper woman Hinata was tasked to kill. He squinted at the final two, a slim man donned in the Akatsuki robes and pierced in a familiar configuration, and trapped in his arms. "We have your woman," Pain stated sullenly, indicating an unconscious Hinata within the newest body's grasp. "If you do not wish for her to die, then surrender." Naruto idly noticed his beloved in the newest incarnation's arms. She was battered, bruised, and bleeding everywhere. Her steel armor was cracked and tinged with soot, and her battle gear was withheld at arm's length by a slew of paper that flowed from Konan. The blonde glared daggers at Pain's favored corpse, but no words came to mind. As though by command, silence stirred in her captor's grasp and went rigid when she realized the situation. Out of instinct, she converted a shot of chakra into electricity and expelled it into Pain's newest body, but the bolts crackled and died as they became infused within the man's frame. "Naruto?" she shouted when her chakra drained. "Don't worry about me." Pain hushed her by placing another of his sharpened rods to her throat. "You have control over this situation," he stated dully. "You can avoid this pain. Just surrender your body, and she will live." The Uzumaki regarded him with a 1,000-yard stare, not bothering to respond. His altered mind still demanded blood, but this time he felt a sense of urgency. Hinata stood before him, the stress of her life in the balance. He glanced at his palm-charred flesh cooked into glowing steel fingers and boiled blood pooling into intricate seals. In that small instant, he remembered losing Shia in agony that his modified Minset distantly remembered. That pain was horrible, something he never thought possible. But now that Hinata was in danger, what then? Shia was a precious girl, but Hinata was so much more, someone that he believed would always be by his side. If she were gone, would all the power and intelligence in the world mean anything? He stared at his mutilated hand as he considered this, oblivious to his artificial sun waning overhead. Meanwhile, the Hyuga in question observed the blonde's demeanor. Naruto, what happened to you? Her Byakugan was disabled by her captor, but she didn't need a bloodline to tell that the blonde had burst a few blood vessels, was bleeding through his pores, and the blood bubbled and smoked before hardening into black smears. He looked like a demon from hell with his sentient hair, bloodshot eyes, and smoke-curdling lips. The scant pieces of jewelry armor he wore were practically fused to him. His fingers were swollen into Shia's boiling claws, while his arms looked more machine than human within the burning confines of their brass bracelets. 6 Rinnegan eyes blinked, and Curse stood before Hinata's half-dead captor. The instant after, the ground rumbled and split and cracked. Molten rock spurted from the earthen gouges, and a wave of boiling air slammed into everyone present. Conan faltered while much of her paper burned, falling to a knee in the sudden pressure invoked by the Uzumaki's speed. Pain and his incarnations remained standing, though the twinges of their many piercings glowed in swelling heat. Before anyone could react, Naruto curled an armored hand around the thin man's head and glanced at the Hyuga with cold, bloody eyes. His dry, crusted lips opened, revealing teeth stained in soot, and he spoke to Hinata with a dry, raspy voice that threatened to fail at any time. Run. Silence. His pale eyes widened at her beloved's demonic appearance, but her feet obeyed him. The instant after his command, she was no longer restrained by arms that sucked the chakra from her. She dove forward under the blonde's outstretched arm and put distance between herself and Pain's multiple bodies. Out of reflex, her former captor was attempting to absorb Naruto's chakra. That much was obvious. The natural energy flowed like a torrent through the blonde's burned arm into the man's head as said enemy reached forward to kill the Uzumaki. His arms moved in slow motion in the Hyuga's eyes, and the spiked rods in his hands inched their way to her beloved's chest. The other 2 Rinnegan users twisted to deliver similar attacks. Naruto, but none of it came to fruition. There was a sudden flash of light, and everything within a 10-foot radius of the blonde flew back, the sole exception being the newest enemy. Still trapped in Naruto's iron grip, the man's body burst into light and convulsed, every orifice expelling blood that dissolved into the unholy chakra that coursed through Naruto's pulsing veins. Hinata saw it all. The man's internals were spun into oblivion, then liquefied, the outermost flesh ripping and writhing. In another second, the blonde earthbound demon held what amounted to a burned bag of flesh in his hand. When he dropped it, Hinata knew she shouldn't have stopped to witness this horrific event. She turned tail and ran again, this time doing everything in her power to hold back tears of fear. It's not the fox. She repeated that mantra to herself. It's not the fox. It's just Naruto. Just Naruto. While the Hyuga ran, Naruto turned to find the female Rinnegan user breaking away from her would-be attack, most likely setting up to summon Pain away once again. The blonde leaned forward and clasped the woman's cold fist before she could completely disengage, and a squeeze drove the burning steel claws into her flesh. The pierced woman never whimpered, screamed, or uttered a sound otherwise, but her freakish eyes widened in realization when the Konoha ninja opened his blackened mouth at her. Hellfire poured from the boy's mouth and engulfed her, thrusting her into a searing wind that tore flesh from bone before feeding it to the flames. In the end, all that remained was a burned stump still firmly clamped in Naruto's hand. The blonde stared at it a moment longer, affirming its owner's demise, before loosening it from his claws and letting it fall into the distant lake. He roamed the landscape with tired eyes. Atop his perch, he could clearly see the devastation. The sunken platform where he first began this battle was charred black against the ever-churning water, and eerie lights reflected off the uneven glass hills in the crater that once housed acres of majestic towers. The setting sun cast looming shadows over the water and burned glass, laying the ground into the coming darkness of night. Naruto flicked his eyes forward. One of those looming shadows took the shape of a man. Pain stood opposite the blonde on a creaking tower, the situation between the 2 warriors remaining unchanged since the battle's evolution. Once again, the god of pain was alone, solitary against the force of nature that was the curse of Konoha. Pain cocked his head to the side. Is that it? He wondered. He's only used a handful of techniques. Could it be that he isn't coherent enough to produce more? Or is he simply waiting for an opportune moment? In the distance, Naruto leaned back with bulging cheeks. Another blast of hellfire. He is too incoherent. I can easily evade that attack from here, and he knows it. And so Pain did. The blonde genius opened his mouth and fire erupted from within, spiraling and twisting its way to Pain's position. At the last possible moment, the pierced Akatsuki leader moved to leap off the flimsy tower before it was turned to slag, but a fluctuation in the chakra flowing to and from his piercings froze his feet. In that small moment, as the flames approached, Pain knew something was wrong. The man's words never reached Naruto's ears. Rather, the blonde watched as the targeted tower melted and crumbled, idly noting that Pain's aura had vanished entirely. Seconds ticked by, and he heaved a breath he didn't know he held. Enemies gone, he muttered, throat sore and burning. Now for some rest. He crumpled to the hot metal of the tower beneath his feet, the raging power of the seal carved into his chest, reigning in the fox's power. The boy's bloody eyes fell like fire, and the world rang in his ears like a million thunderbolts. His fingers and arms, cooked in hot metal, began regaining a small sense of feeling. He felt hot, and although he was practically invincible only moments ago, he could feel a mounting pain creeping into his veins. This is gonna hurt. The last thing he saw before passing out was Hinata crawling over the tower's edge for him, tears in her eyes, and her unheard voice calling out to him. Naruto and Hinata limped away from the wreckage of the Rain Village, their bodies cut and bruised and bleeding from the battle. The blackened city's smelted buildings shined in the early moonlight that escaped the gathering rain clouds, and monstrous fires raged throughout the distraught village. No doubt the survivors were desperate to extinguish the flames before it. Truthfully, Naruto didn't really remember much. His mind recalled being angry beyond comprehension, and the vision of Hinata being held captive by Pain lingered in the darkness, but he couldn't recount anything specific. The last thing he clearly remembered was the effects of Shia's seal fading away, to reveal the Hyuga by his side. About a mile out of the city, Curse fell to his knees in wretched blood and bile. His wounds bled and burned, his heart pounded into swollen lungs, and his head felt like it was being grilled open. In a moment of coherence, he remembered the last time Aya forced herself onto Shia's consciousness with a seal. She fell violently ill after less than an hour's use. He wondered how temporarily merging with a demon soul would affect his health before he lurched forward to puke more blood. Hinata was worried about her beloved's condition. "Naruto," she was frantic, "are you okay? Hold still, I'll help you." Naruto physically protested out of instinct. All his body wanted to do at the moment was expel his organs onto the wet grass, but the constant prompting of soft hands eased him onto his back and forced him to breath. His lungs heaved in violent spurts as the Hyuga placed soothing palms over his burning body. The blonde convulsed in pain every few seconds, and if it wasn't for Hinata's distant words of encouragement, it might have been worse. He curled up into a ball several times with such force that he felt bones strained to the breaking point. Such a thing was welcome. At least broken bones would distract him from his liquefying internals. Naruto. Silence shouted at him in an unusually authoritative stance, "Calm down and breath. Focus on something." She exuded a display of power, but she was a mess on the inside. Was this battle with a madman with delusions of godhood to end with Naruto dying from an overpowered seal used to defeat him? Curse heard the girl's distant voice and squeezed his fists tighter. He didn't know if Hinata had removed Shia's claw weapons, but that was the least of his worries at the moment. His mind was spastic from the searing pain, but it wasn't limited to the physical realm. In that moment, he felt that he understood Shia's plight a little better, and that only made the agony worse. Whether an effect from the seal or the fox, Naruto felt an overwhelming sense of hopelessness and anxiety. Shia and Jiraiya, the closest people to a family he ever had, were gone, and their loss weighed on him. That in and of itself was bad enough, but then there was something else, something timeless and finite all at once. He couldn't explain it, not in this state, but this feeling of isolation tore at him and compounded his physical misery tenfold. As though a great unseen force rose up to proclaim, "You are nothing, no matter your strength." It frightened him to feel this way, and for a moment, he wished his life to end, so that he could escape it. Then he opened his burning eyes to find Hinata hovering over him, tears streaming from her eyes. Her lips quivered in fear and her brow was knit in the greatest worry possible. She was afraid as well. But not for herself or some vague sense of helplessness. She was afraid for him. In that moment, Naruto understood. He had lost some of his most beloved people. Why should Hinata have to suffer that as well? What did it matter that he was small in the eyes of the universe? He was here in the present, in the Hyuga's trembling arms. Shouldn't that have been all that mattered? And Naruto, silence choked, trying to keep a straight face and failing miserably. "Don't die on me. Don't you dare." Tears flooded her eyes at the prospect of the Uzumaki passing on, and her hands shook as they desperately tried to quench the proverbial flames burning within the blonde. "Please." Naruto locked eyes with her and forced his swollen lungs to breathe. After many attempts, his body complied and his pulse lowered under the soothing touch of Hinata's bruised and bloody hands. He willed his arms to move, and only after great strain did they obey. His hand quivered and grasped Hinata's after an arduous journey, and the blonde's throat burned as he spoke. Hinata, his voice cracked from the pain. Thanks. The Hyugas were alleviated somewhat, and her tears dried at the boy's touch. She gave a weak smile. It'll be fine, Naruto. Everything will be fine. And so time passed without another word spoken between the two. Slowly yet surely, Hinata drew upon the chakra crystal's power to mend Naruto's broken body, and little by little, Curse's pain resided into a sore ache that was nothing like its greater sibling of torture. Before the moon reached its apex in the cloudy night sky, the blonde sat up with a great degree of effort. Naruto embraced Hinata. His arms burned, but he didn't want to release her. She was the sole survivor of the battle, the final person who meant the world to him. This only served to remind him of those lost. They're gone, Hinata, he whispered, choking on hot tears. She and Jiraiya are gone. Hinata pursed her lips and returned the embrace. It'll be okay. She rubbed his back and spoke in little more than a hush. Everything will be okay. She held the blonde as he broke down in her arms. Now that the battle was over, he had time to process everything, and Hinata knew he was dealing with Shia and Jiraiya's deaths. Closing her eyes and rocking back and forth, she let him lean all his sadness onto her. He needs me now, she knew, and she offered simple words of comfort. I'll never let go, Naruto. I'll always be here. In a way, she wished this moment would never end, but life would never stop for pain and sorrow. Especially when terror's greatest ambassador arrived to pay a personal visit. Naruto and Hinata were forced from their embrace when a monstrous force rippled throughout the decimated Rain Village. A shadow erupted from the ruined cityscape and became larger and larger in its descent from the dead twilight sky. They scrambled to shaky feet and backed away before the indeterminable mass slammed into the ground before them. Hinata grasped yin and yang, her only remaining advanced weapon, and Naruto unsealed his trademark ninjato from the tattoo in his right arm. The blonde's legs trembled from his own weight, his arms quivered in exhaustion, his chest heaved with labored breathing, and his eyes blurred in weariness. If this was another incarnation of pain, they would not survive. But before they could deliberate further, the dark mass bloomed to reveal that it was constructed of people. Rain ninjas with their slashed headbands and civilians with their soaked clothes. Even Conan stood off to one side. But something was wrong with them. The early moonlight wasn't strong enough to reveal everything, but the slew of newcomers had a dead look in their eyes, lifeless bodies, much like pain. The obvious ninjas of the group carried themselves in belabored ways. Something even civilians wouldn't do in the face of a fight. Hinata activated her bloodline for a moment of clarification, and she froze at the sight. Her enhanced vision saw the innards of the newcomers. They writhed and squirmed as a single living entity, connected by some strange black threads. Even more disturbing, they all led to a single point in the center. Hinata's gaped upon recognition of the man in the center of this entanglement. It was Scythe from Duel's team, one of the outcasts from the Sound Army so long ago defeated beneath Konoha's streets. What are you doing here? She shouted. I saw you die. Naruto heard her words and eventually found the object of her bewilderment. Sure enough, they had met this man before. But he was so different now. The newcomer's mouth stretched ear to ear with those morbid stitches. The man's ebony hair and tall gangly body were held together by dark belts and squirming strands that looked like something from the netherworld rather than a man. Upon closer inspection, Naruto recognized the stitches and realized he had seen this technique before. Kakuzu, the semi-immortal who survived by assimilating the hearts of others within himself. The sickly stitches flexed and twisted from under the thick belts into the lifeless bodies of those surrounding the grotesque stranger, as though the Reaper himself walked the mortal plane with an entourage. But all that paled in comparison to what resided in the disfigured man's face. The scarred and stitched cheeks distracted from any discernible facial features save for the eyes. One such eye matched the rest, a single dark orb that echoed the pits of hell. But the man's left eye. No words were exchanged between the opposing sides. Naruto and Hinata stood in lackluster preparation for an attack, while the stranger and his connected bodies barely moved a muscle. Then the man smiled, his lips stretching inhumanly wide thanks to the stitches, to reveal sharpened teeth jammed into bleeding gums. He raised his arms in a welcoming gesture to accompany the sickening grin. General Curse, General Silence. I thought you appeared familiar. Such a long time since our last meeting. He noted their confused faces. Do you not recognize me? I killed you years ago. Hinata yelled, unwilling to relent. How are you alive? The man offered a quizzical expression before coming to a realization. Ah, forgive me. My appearance slipped my mind. I forgot that I now inhabit another's body. Your confusion is understandable. Who are you? Naruto rasped, praying this man wasn't about to attack them. He frowned. Did they not recognize his mannerisms? Or perhaps, I see, he stated to no one in particular, "You simply do not know me at this time." He smiled and brought a deformed hand to his stomach in a polite gesture. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Supreme Commander of the Gene Freak Division, and first-generation Chakra Syndrome soldier." Naruto and Hinata stood at weary ready, but the man's words bewildered them. Supreme Commander? Gene Freak Division? Chakra Syndrome soldier? But the man's name rendered his lengthy title arbitrary. General